Chapter 588. The fierce battle continued, but the powerhouses of the Holy See were no longer in the mood to fight and began to look for opportunities to escape. Quick, stop them. Don't let them escape. Homelin was anxious that His Majesty Pope had escaped, but he also understood that it was too late to give chase. However, the other powerhouses of the sacred domain were not so lucky. Homelin was determined to leave the lives of all the powerhouses of the sacred domain here. The powerhouses of the sacred domain were the cornerstone of a force. As long as he gathered enough powerhouses of the sacred domain, it would not be a problem to form a large force in a short time. In other words, as long as he killed all the powerhouses of the sacred domain, this force would cease to exist. What Homelin wanted to do was to eliminate all the Holy See powerhouses of the sacred domain, and then destroy the Holy See one step further. Don't think it's that easy to escape. Homelin shouted. He once again summoned the Abyss skeletal dragon and joined the pursuit of the powerhouses of the Holy See. At this time, the battle in Undercity was coming to an end. The sacred army retreated in large batches. Those who could not escape were killed on the spot by the Scourge army and the Necromancers. The Death Knight who killed Boulder was even more ferocious. He waved the knight's sword in his hand mercilessly. The soldiers of the sacred army in white clothes and white armor fell into a pool of blood, regardless of whether they surrendered or not. The worst was the army of the Holy Roman Empire. They were not as strong as the powerhouses of the Holy See. In the end, they were forced to surrender, and only a small part of them managed to escape. After this battle, the Holy Roman Empire's strength was greatly reduced. Their most elite army was forced by Pope Ernst to attack Undercity. If the Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, Charles XXVI, were to see this scene, he would probably vomit blood and die. Kill. K, who had transformed into the Golden Beaumont, was in a killing frenzy. He roared, and a powerful golden light burst forth from him. He raised his huge fist and punched at the closest person to him, the Guangming magistrate Orleaf. The fist energy pierced through space, bringing with it an intense light. The sound of wind flashed in front of Olive's eyes, and the fist became bigger and bigger in his eyes. As a spell breaker, Orleaf's defense was strong, but his attack was average. As a spell breaker, he was very effective against magicians, but not necessarily against warriors. He was beaten by K, who was the best at attacking, to the point that he could only parry and not fight back. In addition, the deaths of Imena and Nord had cast a shadow over his heart. He had long wanted to retreat, but he hadn't been able to find a chance to do so. It was because of a moment of carelessness that he was left wide open. Boom. K's fist landed squarely on Orleaf's chest armor. His strength was so great that Orleaf's armor caved in. Orleaf only felt a sharp pain in his chest. He could only say that one word, and in the next moment, his body flew like a kite. K roared and immediately chased after him. 1 punch, 2 punches, 3 punches. K was unforgiving. He frantically threw out dozens of punches, each of them landing heavily on Orleaf's body. With the last punch, Orleaf was fiercely smashed to the ground. The powerful fist energy penetrated the ground, and huge cracks appeared on the ground. The surrounding dozens of meters were covered in golden light, and the ground caved in. Soon, Orleaf stopped moving. His face was badly mutilated and swollen like a pig's head. It was impossible to see the expression on his face. His body was already twisted beyond recognition. His armor was shattered, and all his bones were broken. His eyes were wide open in shock. He had been dead for a long time. Imena was dead, Nord was dead, and Orleaf was also dead. Several sacred domain powerhouses had died in an instant. Dokit was so shocked that he couldn't speak. His body was trembling. He had long been scared out of his wits by Beaumont's ferocity. Not far away, the battle between moon-devouring Wolf D. Lin and Burkado was also nearing its end. As a sacred knight, Burkado was at an absolute disadvantage in the battle with D. Lin. He was beaten until he was covered in wounds. If he wasn't a sacred knight, he would have died long ago. At this time, D. Lin used his innate ability. Moon-devouring. With a loud roar, a powerful force that made one's heart tremble erupted from D. Lin's body in an instant. Before even getting close, one could feel a bone-chilling coldness. In the sky, the shadow of a huge white wolf suddenly appeared. It was D. Lin's true body, the moon-devouring wolf. The moon-devouring wolf opened its mouth, and a powerful suction force filled the entire space. Not good. Bercado only felt that the space around him had been completely sealed. He was terrified. His body involuntarily flew up until he was completely swallowed by the moon-devouring wolf. Bercado was also dead. Up until now, the Holy See had lost 4 sacred domain powerhouses. This time, not only were they seriously injured, even the Holy See was in danger of being destroyed. Prats, Montego, and Hill were besieging Dragon Knight Herlin. As one of the most powerful Dragon Knights, Herlin was clearly at a disadvantage even though he was fighting 1 against 3. He was beaten by the deans of the 3 great academies of the Roland Empire to the point that he couldn't even lift his head. His body was covered in wounds. He wanted to escape, but he couldn't break out of the encirclement. At this time, Prats stopped. He looked into the distance with a thoughtful expression. "Prats, you old bastard, what's wrong?" Hill quickly felt that Prats was abnormal and took the initiative to ask, "I think it's time to stop fighting now." Prats pondered for a moment and said, "The Scourge Church's victory has already been decided. It won't do us any good to continue fighting. The destruction of the Holy See isn't in our interest either." Hill lowered his head and thought for a moment. He quickly understood the key point and nodded. With Prats and Hill secretly holding back, Herlin quickly saw through the clues. He had an idea. Flames erupted from his body, and he quickly rushed out of the encirclement. Soon, he disappeared into the horizon. Montego wanted to chase after him, but he couldn't. He could only watch helplessly. "Let's go." Seeing that the powerhouses of the Holy See had either died or escaped, the remaining Dokit and Higman no longer had any fighting spirit. The only thought in their minds was to escape. "Where do you think you're going?" Hamelin snorted coldly. His body turned into a cloud of black smoke and blocked the two's path. Hamelin held a long bone staff in his hand. His silver hair danced in the wind, and a cold smile appeared on his bony face. "You have nowhere else to go. Die." At this time, the Heavenly Wolf King D. Lin, Kay, Corbett, and the rest had finished off their opponents and had surrounded them. The Corpse Wizard King Goose C and the Death Knights had also led the Scourge army to form a huge encirclement. Juliana had also led her army to surround them. They were densely packed, layer after layer. Dokit and Higman's faces were pale. They knew that the Holy See had already lost. They had suffered a crushing defeat. The two of them looked at each other, the muscles on their faces twitching violently. They could see the despair in each other's hearts. Faced with the threat of death, Higman's knees turned to jelly. He knelt down in front of Hamelin with a thud. Sir, I was wrong. I shouldn't have joined the Holy See. I shouldn't have participated in this so-called holy war. I have no enmity with the Scourge Church. They were the ones who forced me. Please let me go." Higman pleaded. Dokit was shocked and furious. "Higman, how dare you? Didn't you join the Holy See on your own accord for glory and wealth? You even wanted to fight with Bicardo for the position of temple leader. Now you're saying that we forced you?" "Yes, sir. They forced me." Higman stood up and pointed at Dokit. "I was never a member of the Holy See. I want to draw the line between us now." Dokit didn't expect Higman to bite back. He was so angry that he couldn't speak. "Sir, I can join the Scourge Church. I'm a powerhouse of the sacred domain, Holy Archer Higman. I believe that with my strength, I could do a lot for the Scourge Church. I'm willing to be your servant. Please accept me." In order to survive, Higman threw caution to the wind. The dignity and face of a powerhouse of the sacred domain were all thrown to the back of his mind. At this moment, all he wanted was to survive. It wasn't easy for a powerhouse of the sacred domain to cultivate. Higman had also put in a lot of effort. He had just become a powerhouse of the sacred domain not long ago. He still had a lot of youth to squander. He really wasn't willing to die like this. Enough. Hamelin, who was watching their performance, couldn't take it anymore. He coldly interrupted Higman's words and said, "You don't have to defend yourselves anymore. Everyone from the Holy See deserves to die. No one can be absolved of their crimes. Also, our Scourge Church doesn't lack 1 or 2 powerhouses of the sacred domain." When Higman heard this, his heart sank. Extreme disappointment appeared on his face. However, This disappointment turned into resentment. At this moment, an ominous glint flashed in his eyes. A powerful aura erupted like a mountain. He quickly took out a weapon from his body. Go to hell. Lightning's fury. With a low shout, a huge ball of light instantly formed. Traces of lightning energy penetrated through the air, twisting like a spirit snake. Amidst the dancing lightning, the ferocious expression on Higman's face could be faintly seen. Is this your final struggle before death? Hamelin smiled coldly. He didn't think much of it. In fact, he was already prepared. With a wave of his bone staff, he quickly cast a spell. His speed was even faster than Higman's. A white bone spear appeared out of thin air. With the sound of breaking wind, it directly shot towards Higman. Higman, who was in the middle of casting a spell, didn't defend himself. The white bone spear directly penetrated his chest. Higman's eyes widened. Blood slowly flowed out from the corner of his mouth. He held the dark gold crossbow, his finger on the trigger trembling. In the end, his strongest skill, lightning's fury, wasn't released. He directly breathed his last. Just as everyone's attention was on Higman, Dokit moved. His body flew up like an eagle, escaping with lightning speed. His body was small and thin, but his movements were quite agile. Chapter 589. Dokit was fast, but Ron was even faster. His body turned into a black shadow, and with a swish, he disappeared from where he stood. The next moment, he appeared in front of Dokit. In an instant, Ron had intercepted him. You? Dokit was stupefied. Cold sweat flowed down his cheeks, and a shadow of death loomed over him. You don't have a chance. Surrender, Ron said indifferently. Ron, do you really want to kill us all? Dokit's tone was pleading. He was about to kneel down, a pitiful expression on his face. Ron's lips moved. He couldn't be as cold-hearted as Hamelin's grandfather. Furthermore, Nord's actions earlier had shaken him, causing him to start thinking about many things. The confusion in his thoughts caused a trace of confusion to appear in his eyes. It was this moment of absent-mindedness that Dokit sensitively caught. He shouted loudly, and a sharp light erupted from his body, forcing Ron to retreat. Ron, quickly stop him. Everyone cried out in alarm, but Hamelin frowned slightly. Where do you think you're going? Ron shouted. With a slight wave of the dragonbone staff in his hand, a light blue shadow shot out. Frost Nova. Boom! With a loud sound, a blue light erupted from Dokit's body. A bone-chilling chill rapidly spread, causing everyone in the surroundings to shiver involuntarily. Pfft! Dokit spat out a mouthful of blood. The moment it came out of his mouth, it froze into ice shards in the blink of an eye. His body tilted, and he fell headfirst. Kill him. Seeing that Dokit was injured, everyone swarmed over. They held weapons in their hands and shouted loudly. Their faces were filled with murderous intent, and they couldn't wait to tear these people from the Holy See to shreds. Suddenly, Dokit leaped up and grabbed with his hand. Immediately, there was a cry of surprise. Then, a short sword was pressed against a person's throat. Don't come over. Dokit saw that there was no way to escape, so he could only take hostages as he spoke fiercely. Shea. Ron was stunned for a moment. When he saw the face of Dokit's hostage, he cried out in surprise. He had never thought that the hostage would be Shea. When Dokit fell, Shea was the closest to him and was hit by his attack. Sister Shea. Kadena panicked when she saw this. She didn't care about the difference in strength between the two of them and rushed over. You, let him go. Don't come over, or I'll kill her. Dokit's eyes were bloodshot. He pointed his dagger at Shea's neck. At this time, everyone surrounded them. They were so densely packed that it was like an airtight iron bucket. However, when they saw that the person being held hostage was Shea, they did not dare to act rashly. Ron, don't bother about me. Kill him. Although Shea was being held hostage, she was quite unyielding. She held her head high and refused to give in. Shut up, little b******. Dokit said fiercely. Don't think that I don't know what you're planning. Do you think that your defense is so high that you'll risk serious injury in exchange for my life? Let me tell you, stop dreaming. I can kill you on the spot if I release my power. Even a priest won't be able to save you. Even if I die, you'll be buried with me. The murderous words shocked everyone. Everyone sucked in a breath of cold air and looked at Ron at the same time. At this moment, Ron could not help but regret his carelessness. On the battlefield, anything could happen, especially before the opponent put down their weapons. They were still the enemy. Cheap sympathy was completely unnecessary. He took a deep breath and braced himself. "Let her go, and I'll let you go." "Ha ha ha." Dokit laughed when he heard this. "Ron, I was really afraid that you'd make a move. Looks like I'm quite lucky to have caught a big fish. If I'm not wrong, this female knight should be your woman." The muscles on Ron's cheeks twitched violently. His face was tense, and he did not reply, silently acknowledging this fact. "Ron, Sister Shea, Kadena hurriedly ran over and tugged at Ron's sleeve. "Ron, you must save Sister Shea. Ron, kill him quickly. Don't bother about me." Shea also understood her situation at this moment. However, in order to not make things difficult for Ron, she gritted her teeth and said this. "Hee hee." Dokit laughed sinisterly. "Ron, I won't make things difficult for you. Ask them to withdraw and let me go. Then I'll return her to you. How about it?" "Sure." Ron nodded expressionlessly. For the sake of Shea's safety, he had no choice but to agree to this request. He waved his hand. "Disperse." Vivian looked at Dokit unwillingly and retreated to the side with the necromancers. Juliana glanced at Ron and waved her hand to get Lachlan to withdraw with the Abia army. Only the Scourge was left. The Death Knight would not listen to Ron's orders. He stood there quietly without moving, neither retreating nor attacking. Ron's gaze hardened slightly as he looked at Gusi. Gusi muttered to herself and nodded lightly at the Death Knight. Only then did the Death Knight lead the Scourge and slowly disperse. A gap finally appeared in the encirclement that was like an iron bucket. Furthermore, under Juliana's arrangement, a person who looked like a priest was pushed forward to deal with any unexpected situations. "Ron, don't worry about me." Shea was a little anxious. If not for the fact that her body was being controlled by Dokit, she would have already committed suicide. Unfortunately, Dokit had already predicted this and did not give her the chance. "Hee hee, very good, very good." Dokit's gaze was like a venomous snake's as he held Shea hostage and retreated step by step. He spoke sinisterly as he slowly withdrew from the encirclement. Ron frowned and clenched his fists tightly before releasing them. His body moved slightly, but he heard Dokit shout sternly, "Don't come over. If you do, I'll kill her." Ron stopped in his tracks and said in a low voice, "Didn't you say you'd let her go once you left? Why? Are you going back on your word?" "Hee hee. If I let her go now, what if you guys pounced on me? I have to wait until I'm sure I'm safe," Dokit said with a fake smile. He held Shea hostage and slowly retreated. "Don't follow me." Ron did not dare to chase after them. He could only watch as Dokit and Shea walked further and further away. Juliana frowned and walked closer to Ron. "He's walking so far away. Could he be plotting something?" "I don't think so," Ron muttered. "He just wants to live. There's no need for him to kill anyone." "I hope so," Juliana sighed. She did not believe it, but she still had a glimmer of hope in her heart. Homelin looked deeply at Ron and shook his head slightly. There was a hint of disappointment in his eyes. This child was still too inexperienced and emotional. This was not a good thing. At that moment, Dokit had already retreated more than 100 meters. From Ron's distance, he could only see a small black shadow. "I say, you should be able to let her go now, right?" Ron's voice came from afar. "This distance is safe enough." "Hee, that's right." Dokit smiled. "At this distance, even if I escape, I believe you guys won't be able to catch up." Ron's face darkened, and he snorted coldly. Dokit paused. At this moment, a sinister smile appeared on his face. He asked without rhyme or reason, "Ron, you must love this girl very much, right? What are you trying to say?" Ron was stunned. At this moment, a bad feeling flashed through his heart. "I can see that you care a lot about her, but I want to say," Dokit said, his eyes full of hatred. Then, he suddenly raised his voice. "Ron, you killed so many of our experts and single-handedly destroyed the Holy Sea's many years of foundation. I'll make you suffer forever." "What?" Ron's eyes suddenly widened, revealing a look of disbelief. Just as Homelin had said, he was still too inexperienced and underestimated the viciousness of people's hearts. At this moment, it was too late for him to do anything. Sister Shea, stop. Ron's eyes turned red. He shot out like an arrow and flew over. Unfortunately, it was too late. Ron, go to hell and regret it. Dokit had already raised his dagger with a sinister smile and stabbed out fiercely. Shea's body shook violently for a moment. A sharp blade pierced through her body and pierced her heart. In an instant, everyone was stunned. Time seemed to have stopped. At this moment, Ron saw Shea's eyes. Her eyes revealed infinite longing. Shea. An intense pain filled Ron's chest. He was so oppressed by this pain that he couldn't breathe. Only at this moment did he realize how deep his feelings for Shea were. Ron. As if she could read Ron's love for her from his eyes, Shea revealed a smile. Immediately after, her eyes gradually dimmed. Ron, we'll meet again. Dokit laughed maniacally as he pulled out his dagger from Shea's body. He kicked off with his legs and was about to flee into the distance. At this moment, there was a whoosh as a huge prison made of bones surrounded him. Bone cage, Hamelin coldly shouted. His body flew high into the air, and he pointed his bone staff forward. Needless to say, this bone cage was summoned by him. No. Dokit's expression changed drastically as he grabbed the edge of the bone cage. His face was full of shock. He had thought that he could escape, but he hadn't expected the necromancer to have such a move. The bone cage naturally couldn't trap Dokit, but it was enough to delay his movements. Damn it! Dokit quickly came back to his senses. He used all his strength to break free. At this moment, he heard Hamelin's cold voice. Those who don't keep their promises will never have a good ending. As soon as he finished speaking, Dokit felt a pain in his chest. A translucent bone spear had pierced through his heart. You? Dokit looked at Hamelin with eyes full of resentment. He finally collapsed unwillingly. Sister Shea. Kadena screamed as she rushed over, sobbing. She didn't notice that the concentric knot on her hand with Shea had suddenly broken and fallen to the ground. Shea, what's wrong? Ron rushed to Shea and picked her up. At this moment, Ron's eyes suddenly widened. He saw that Shea's face was pale and she had stopped breathing. Shea. Ron let out a long cry of despair. His heart was bleeding. If he hadn't hesitated at that moment, if he had been more decisive, perhaps none of this would have happened. Pain. Bone-piercing pain. Ron's body trembled. He had never thought that the pain of losing his lover would be so unbearable. It was a feeling that he couldn't even cry. Shea was dead. Dokit's sword strike before he left had shattered her heart. With his power as a sacred domain expert, it wasn't difficult for him to do this. Ron, it's all your fault. Sob. You have to compensate my sister Shea. Kadena sobbed as she beat Ron with all her might. In the end, she threw herself into his arms and sobbed. Ron didn't move. He just stood there blankly with Shea's body in his arms. His heart was numb with despair. At this moment, Delin, Kay, Hamelin, and the others surrounded Ron. Everyone was silent. Juliana turned around and gently wiped the tears from the corners of her eyes. Her sister, Catherine, was already sobbing. On the battlefield, Ron hugged Shea's body and gently brushed her hair away from her forehead. He looked at her beautiful face in a daze and didn't move at all. After an unknown amount of time, in the end, it was Hamelin who spoke. He sighed slightly and said, Ron, my condolences. That person, I've already killed him for you. The most important thing for you now is to pull yourself together. Don't forget, the entire Scourge Church is watching you. Ron slowly raised his head. His eyes had turned blood red. Everyone could not help but feel their hearts tremble when they met his gaze. They could all feel the surging, killing intent. I want revenge. Ron clenched his teeth. Like a wounded beast letting out a low roar, he squeezed out these words from the gaps of his teeth. He stood up with a swish, waved his robe, and said while gnashing his teeth. Chapter 590. Seeing that the Scourge Church was safe, Platz, Monty got, and Hill bade farewell to Ron. Ron was grateful for their selfless help and took out 30 million gold coins from his originally limited funds as thanks. The three of them refused, but Ron gave each of them 100 health potions, which they accepted. The next day, after a short rest, the Scourge army set off for the north. They did not encounter any resistance along the way, and after a few days, they recovered the entire kingdom of Ebia. The Scourge Church was not satisfied after recovering all of its territory. Under Ron's orders, they went straight north and began attacking the strongholds of the Holy Roman Empire. The mighty undead army set off from the kingdom of Ebia's military stronghold, Amufa City, and launched a fierce attack on the major cities of the Holy Roman Empire. In just a few days, the small countries around the Holy Roman Empire fell one after another, and the undead army broke into the Holy Roman Empire's territory. Charles XXVI of the Holy Roman Empire was as anxious as an ant on a hot pan. He constantly sent messengers to ask for peace, but they were all rejected by Ron. He was determined to destroy the Holy See, as well as the soil that the Holy See grew from, the Holy Roman Empire. He wanted to destroy the faith of the Holy See and make this enemy of the Scourge Church completely disappear from the continent of Noah. Not a trace of it would be left behind, just like what the Holy See did to the Scourge Church 100,000 years ago. There was also Shea's revenge. Although Dokit, who killed Shea, had been killed by Hamelin, Ron's hatred had been transferred to the Holy See. He wanted to destroy the Holy See and avenge Shea. Holy Roman Empire's capital, Sao Paulo. The sky was dark and gloomy, and the atmosphere was oppressive, just like everyone's mood at the moment. A shadow loomed over everyone's head, and the bustling street was less lively than usual. It was a little more deserted. On top of the wide city walls, rows upon rows of fully armed soldiers were patrolling. Every single one of them had a dignified and incomparably solemn expression on their faces. This kind of expression was rarely seen on the faces of the soldiers of the Holy Empire's capital, St. Paulo. My lord, there are no abnormalities. Nothing out of the ordinary. After the soldiers finished patrolling, they reported to a person who looked like an officer. It was a basic rule for a soldier to report after patrolling. It was written clearly in every soldier's booklet. Those who violated it would be punished according to military rules. Yes, the middle-aged man who looked like a military officer nodded lightly. He was dressed in full armor. Other than his face, his entire body was wrapped in iron armor. He stood on top of the city wall and looked into the distance. Deep worry flashed in his eyes. After completing the mission, the stiff look on the soldiers' faces relaxed a bit. A soldier looked at the iron-faced officer in their hearts and asked boldly, "Sir, will the undead army of the Scourge Church really come?" "Yes," the military officer replied without hesitation. His face was grim. The Scourge army has already conquered several big cities and is marching all the way to Sao Paulo. There is no doubt that they are coming for Sao Paulo. Fisk, after hearing the military officer's answer, the soldiers gasped in their hearts. Other than the counterinsurgency operation decades ago, as the capital of the Holy Roman Empire, Sao Paulo had not been involved in a war for many years. It was normal for the soldiers to be frightened. The military officer paused for a moment and continued. "To be exact, they are coming for the Holy See. Don't forget that behind us is Mount Hygel." As an outstanding graduate of the Empire, the middle-aged military officer saw through the intentions of the Scourge army at a glance. Since ancient times, wars between countries were easy to resolve. However, wars involving religions were definitely cruel battles that would not end until one side completely collapsed. The soldiers' faces were filled with fear. Most of them had heard about the Battle of the Undercity that took place in the Kingdom of Ebia. In this battle, the Holy See was defeated. More than half of the strong people in the church died, and only a small number of them escaped. The army of the Holy Roman Empire that followed them was also defeated and surrendered. Because of this, Charles XXVI began a large-scale conscription. In the entire empire, as long as one was able-bodied, there was basically no one who was not conscripted. Some of the old, weak, sick, and disabled were also used in the logistics. Even so, they could not resist the surging undead army. The military officer sighed slightly, and a trace of helplessness flashed in his eyes. The duty of soldier was to be loyal to the country and protect it. They should not be involved in a meaningless religious war. However, What could they do about those who were completely controlled by religion? After all, the Holy Roman Empire did not even have a single strong person from the sacred domain. If they did, they would have pledged their loyalty to the Holy See. Although the military officer did not understand the Scourge Church, he looked down on the Holy See. These guys did not do anything productive and kept talking about God Guangming every day. However, he had to admit that the curio was strong. As the guardian of the empire, the Holy See did a good job. Their strong people were even stronger than the warlock saints of the Roland Empire. However, they control their thoughts more strictly than the Roland Empire. In fact, this also represented the thoughts of many people. Can we stop the undead army of the Scourge Church? A soldier asked faintly. No one answered. Everyone was silent. Facing the undead army of the Scourge Church that had defeated the Holy Legion, no one had any confidence in their hearts. It said that the undead army eats human flesh and can even bring corpses back to life, a soldier said. When he said this, his face was filled with horror. That's too scary. Fear was contagious. As soon as this was said, the faces of all the soldiers were filled with horror. All along, everyone who talked about the Scourge Church would turn pale. This Scourge Church that had risen in such a short period of time had become a nightmare of the human world on the Noah continent. The Scourge Church had risen too quickly. It was so fast that it was unbelievable. A church that had never been heard of had consecutively defeated the army of the Holy Roman Empire and the army of the Holy See in just a few months. In their hearts, the Scourge Church was a synonym for terror, power, depravity, and destruction. Wherever it went, not even a blade of grass would grow. It's not that exaggerated. The officer replied after some thought. I heard from the people at the front lines that the Scourge Church's army has a type of undead creature called the ghouls. They like to eat the corpses of the dead. I've never heard of them eating the living. In addition, it's too exaggerated to say that they can bring corpses back to life. This is an ability that only the gods have. As far as I know, those people didn't really come back to life. They were just corpses that were being controlled. Also, the officer continued, the Scourge Church's army isn't as bloodthirsty as the rumors say. Basically, when a city surrenders, the battle is over. Other than eliminating resistance forces, I've never heard of them massacring civilians. However, they will burn churches, destroy statues of gods, and destroy everything related to the Holy See. Hearing the officer's words, the people were relieved. This was especially true for those who believe in the Holy See but were not very firm in their beliefs. They quietly threw away the crosses in their arms. Just as the soldiers were chatting with the officer, a soldier's face suddenly froze. The next moment, his face revealed an extremely horrified expression. He pointed to the sky and shouted loudly, "What the hell is going on? What's that?" Everyone was shocked and looked in the direction of his finger. They saw that in the sky, a large dark cloud had appeared out of nowhere. That dark cloud seemed to be made up of countless blackbirds, dark and oppressive as they rushed out. Those are gargoyles. The officer's face changed drastically. He quickly pulled out a long sword from his space bag. The enemy is here. Prepare for battle. Boom, boom, boom. At this moment, a loud noise came from afar. It sounded like hundreds of thousands of soldiers and horses were marching at the same time. The earth trembled violently. Not long after, black shadows appeared in the soldiers' line of sight. These black shadows were all skeletons. They were as densely packed as ants, and their numbers were terrifying. So many skeletons. When the soldiers saw this, their legs turned to jelly. Although they were mentally prepared, the number of undead creatures far exceeded their imagination. Not to mention fighting. Just looking at them was enough to make their scalps go numb. Whoosh! A flag was raised high. It fluttered in the wind. It was the symbol of the Scourge, the blood-red skull flag. The soldiers' faces were filled with horror. In the face of such a powerful army, they wished they were in a nightmare. However, at this moment, everyone was sure of one fact. Chapter 591. In the imperial capital of the Holy Empire, St. Paulo, a beautiful woman was lying on the bed in the bedchamber of His Majesty Charles XXVI. Beside her stood a black-haired youth. This youth was looking at her with eyes full of tenderness. This young man was Ron. That's right, he was Ron. At this moment, he was in the palace of Charles XXVI of the Holy Roman Empire. The reason was simple. Under the attack of the undead army of the Scourge Church, St. Paul had only resisted for a short day before it fell. The undead army had invaded the city and captured all of the emperor's ministers in the palace, locking them in the underground prison of the palace. Their luxurious palace had naturally become the residence of the high-ranking officers of the Scourge Church. The woman lying on the bed was Shaya. At this moment, she was a corpse. She was wearing a beautiful palace dress. Her eyes were closed and her face was rosy, as if she was asleep. She looked no different from a living person. If it had been an ordinary corpse, it would have rotted after so many days. However, it wasn't difficult for the Scourge Church to preserve a corpse. Shaya, are you really going to leave me like this? Ron muttered. He lowered his head and gently kissed Shaya's arm. A warm feeling came from the side of his lips, as if it was beating blood. He didn't know how the corpse wizard King Goose had treated it, but it was exactly the same as Shaya's when she was alive. Many days had passed, but Ron still hadn't accepted the fact that Shaya had died. He looked at Shaya's face in a daze, as if he wanted to imprint her face in his heart. He fell into deep reminiscence, and every moment of his time with Shaya appeared in his mind. Knock, knock, knock. The sound of knocking on the door interrupted Ron's thoughts. Vivian's voice came from outside the door. Young lord, come in. Ron sighed and said, Young lord. Vivian walked in and closed the door behind her. Although they had conquered the Holy Roman Empire's capital, St. Paul, she didn't show any joy on her face. It was as if everything was expected. The Scourge army was too powerful. To be exact, there was no one in the entire Noah continent who could be a match for the Scourge Church. Excluding the fact that there were powerhouses in the Divine Realm, the Orc Empire and the Elf Empire might not even be a match. Of course, the Kingdom of Magical Beasts had too many powerhouses. Any one of them was a magical beast from the sacred domain. There were countless magical beasts at the master level. Ron, necromancers, Abia army, Ron, Empire, 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 Ron, Empire, 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 necromancers, army, Abia, Empire. The effect was very good. In actual combat, many necromancers had a good breakthrough in their strength. Some even broke through to the master level. What's the matter? Ron asked. He didn't turn his head. His eyes never left Shaya. Vivian was here to report to Ron. After the Scourge annihilated St. Paul's resistance, they entered the city. However, to Vivian's surprise, they encountered fierce resistance from the city's civilians. Armed with crude weapons, they launched attacks at the Scourge. Sporadic street battles broke out, just like what Gloom City had done to Holy Empire's army in the past. However, this time, St. Paul was the main character. Under the fierce resistance, Vivian's necromancers also suffered some casualties. What made her uncomfortable was that the casualties were more than when they attacked St. Paul directly. After listening to Vivian's report, Ron's eyes moved from Shaya to Vivian. He stood up and said slowly, St. Paul is the headquarters of the Holy See. The Holy See has been operating here for a long time. There must be a lot of believers. The atmosphere of faith here is much stronger than ordinary cities. It's not surprising to encounter fierce resistance. Vivian nodded and asked, Then what should we do? Kill them. Ron said crisply. There was no trace of emotion on his face. We gave them a chance to choose. They can choose not to believe in the Scourge Church, but those who believe in the Holy See must die. Ron's voice was not loud, but a strong murderous intent flashed in his eyes. This murderous intent made Vivian, who was standing at the side, shiver. Yes, young master. I know what to do. Vivian muttered to herself for a moment. After thinking for a while, she continued, There's one more thing. We don't have many life potions left. Ron was slightly taken aback. Isn't Rainey in charge of making the life potions? Are there not enough materials? No, Vivian answered. There are enough materials. It's just that we've been fighting for a long time, and the life potions have been greatly depleted. No matter how hard Rainey works, she can't keep up with his speed. She hasn't slept for days, I see. Ron sighed slightly. Hearing that Rainey was tired, he couldn't help but feel a little heartache. He thought for a while. How about this? We'll postpone the attack plan for now. Let's rest in St. Paul first. Also, let Rainey rest well. Don't tire herself out. Yes, young master. Vivian's eyebrows relaxed. According to the original plan, the next step would be to attack Mount Hyjal. With the current state of the Calamity Army, we really need to rest. Ron scratched his head and muttered to himself, "This is strange. The Holy See has a priest who can heal. Don't we necromancers have other methods of healing other than the life potions? Sigh. I'll have to ask Grandpa Homelin when I have the chance." At this time, there was another knock on the door. "Come in," Ron said. The door was pushed open, and the necromancer, Sally, came in. She looked at Ron and couldn't help but feel nervous. She bowed slightly. "Young master, Big Elder wants to see you." "Yes, I'll go right away." Hearing that Big Elder had summoned him, Ron stood up immediately. Big Elder was Homelin, and Second Elder was Goosey. With their strength and experience, they were completely qualified to be the elders of the Scourged Church. After Ron left, only Vivian and Sally were left in Charles XXVI's bedroom. Their gazes landed on the lifelike corpse of Shea lying on the bed at the same time. Sally bit her lips. Young master hasn't put down Sister Shea yet. He's been keeping this corpse all this time. Sigh. Vivian sighed softly. Looking at Shea, who was once a student and later a colleague, her heart was filled with sympathy. She shook her head. Young master is too pitiful. The blow of losing his lover is unbearable. I really hope he can walk out from the shadow of Shea's death as soon as possible. Ron came to a side hall in the Holy Roman Empire. The moment he walked in, he saw Grandpa Homelin and Second Elder Goosey. The Death Knight stood behind him, his eyes closed and motionless. He didn't even greet Ron when he saw him. Big Elder, Second Elder. Ron bowed slightly and greeted them. He used to call Homelin Grandpa, but now he had changed the way he addressed him. In formal situations, he should call him by his position. "Ron, you're here." Homelin smiled. As a senior of the Scourged Church and Ron's mentor, he naturally didn't have any qualms about calling him by his name. "Young master." Second Elder Goosey stood up with a smile and nodded as a greeting. He looked at the Death Knight beside him. "Rygelsford, why aren't you saluting the young master?" Ron looked at the Death Knight and carefully sized him up. Only then did he know that this powerful Death Knight was called Rygelsford. Death Knight Rygelsford suddenly opened his eyes. His gaze fell on Ron, and the corners of his mouth curled up. This was definitely not a kind smile, but a disdainful one. However, he didn't dare to disobey Goosey's orders. He pressed his hand to his chest and performed a knight salute. Then he closed his eyes again and remained motionless as if he had fallen asleep. Ron couldn't see his expression through the hard steel mask. Death Knight Rygelsford came from a great family. He had a special position in the Scourged Church 100,000 years ago. He was arrogant and conceited. Anyone with a discerning eye could tell that this young master's strength wasn't recognized by him. This guy, Goosey, couldn't do anything about Rygelsford's arrogance. He could only smile awkwardly. Ron shrugged helplessly. It wasn't wise to argue with a dead guy about his attitude. "Great Elder, is there something you need from me?" Ron went straight to the point. "Yes." Homelin nodded. He paused for a moment. "A few days ago, a few people who claimed to be from the council contacted me. They said that they hoped that we could use the council to resolve the dispute with the Holy See and restore peace to the Noah continent." "Ron, what do you think?" "Oh, the council?" Hearing the name of the council, Ron's eyes flashed. "It seems that they're here to mediate. But I'm more interested in who they are." There were a few saint-level magic beasts. Merlin thought for a moment before saying, "There were also a few humans, but I don't remember their names. Those guys were immediately rejected by me as soon as they spoke, which made them very angry. But they didn't have the guts to attack me. It wasn't that Homelin was conceited. His undead magic had reached the peak of the sacred domain, and his understanding of the law of death was deeper than the average person. He was already one of the strongest in the Scourged Church 100,000 years ago. It was just that at that time, the Scourged Church was at its peak. The Scourged Church had countless strong people, including the Lich King. He was just one of the strongest people in the Scourged Church. But now, he was the strongest person in the Scourge Church. Under the Scourge Church, whether it was humans, magical beasts, or other races, they would have to think twice before fighting with Homelin. Are they just a few magical beasts from the sacred domain? Ron said disapprovingly. With their strength, it's not enough to stop our determination to attack Mount Hyjal. It's more likely that they're from the divine realm, but they don't seem to be in the Noah continent. Homelin nodded with satisfaction. It's good that you can think like that. We have to eliminate the Holy See as soon as possible. At least before they return. They'll return? Ron asked with some surprise. Great Elder, do you know where they went? Although I don't know where they went, I know what they're going to do. Homelin smiled and replied. Ron looked at Homelin with a puzzled expression. A planar mission. Homelin spat out a few words. I believe they must have left the Noah continent to complete an extremely difficult planar mission. I'm afraid that this mission can only be completed by the Divine Realm's powerhouses. A mission that can be completed by the Divine Realm's powerhouses would naturally have extremely high rewards. Homelin said slowly. Some missions may not even be completed by the Divine Realm's powerhouses. Planar mission. Ron was stunned. Just like when we went to the other dimension? Yes. Ron suddenly realized why those Divine Realm's powerhouses had left. So we have to hurry and attack Mount Hyjal before they return. If they return, things will be troublesome. Homelin said. All right. Ron nodded solemnly. He thought for a while and told him about the current situation of the Scourge Army. The Scourge Army really needed to rest and reorganize now. After attacking the Holy Roman Empire, there were still a lot of things to deal with. Ron told Homelin about the shortage of potions of life and asked the question that he had been hiding in his heart. I see, Homelin said with a smile. Actually, the Scourge Church also has a healing profession, which is the necromancer. However, this profession has disappeared. Not only the necromancer, but also the necromancer swordsman and the necromancer assassin. These professions have all disappeared from this world. Homelin sighed slightly, his tone a little sad. At this time, Gusi took over and said, That's not a problem. I still have some books on necromancy in my Temple of Abhorrence. Through these books, we can cultivate some low-level necromancers. It just takes time. Of course, we can forget about becoming a holy wizard for now. I see. Ron nodded with a smile on his face. This problem that had been bothering him for a long time had finally been solved. It was just that it couldn't be put to use yet. After talking about business, Ron was about to leave when Homelin called out to him again. You've been keeping that girl's body? Homelin asked. Ever since Shea's death, Ron had been guarding her body every day without doing anything. He seemed to be a little depressed. Homelin couldn't help but worry for Ron when he saw this. Yes. Ron took a deep breath and replied. Forget about her. Ron. Homelin sighed. The dead are already dead. The living have to be stronger. Ron fell silent. He bit his lips and didn't reply. Tears faintly flickered in the corners of his eyes. Homelin sighed. He didn't want to force Ron, but this kid's feelings were too deep. There were still many things that he needed to deal with in the Scourge Church. He couldn't continue being depressed like this. At this time, Gusi suddenly interjected. Actually, it's not impossible to revive her. What? Ron was stunned. He raised his head and looked at Gusi in astonishment. At this moment, he couldn't believe his ears. Chapter 592. Second Elder. Is what you're saying true? Ron stepped forward as he stared intently at Gusi's face with an expectant expression. Yes. Gusi nodded and replied with a smile. Wait. Ron thought for a moment and suddenly felt that something was wrong. He glanced at Gusi and said seriously, Are you talking about using the undead magic Resurrect Dead to resurrect Shia? The Dead Resurrection spell was the exclusive spell of the Corpse Wizard King. It could resurrect the dead, but it would only be a corpse without any consciousness. Although it could preserve the strength and fighting skills of the dead, it was meaningless to Ron. He wanted to resurrect Shia, not Shea's corpse, and not a tool to fight for him. Full-text spell, of course not. The Corpse Wizard King Gusi chuckled. He thought for a moment and said, This is different from resurrecting a corpse. The corpse I resurrected can not only retain the power it had when it was alive, but can also preserve the deceased's memories. This is because this corpse contains her soul, just like, as he spoke, he pointed at Wrigglesford, who was beside him. Just like him, the Death Knight looked at the invited. Ron understood that Goosey wanted to create a Death Knight. Ron looked at Wrigglesford. Other than the fact that he was a corpse, he was no different from an ordinary person. Death Knights could not die, because they were already dead before they became Death Knights. Hummelin smiled. One more thing. Shea seems to be a fire battle energy knight. After she is resurrected, her strength will also change. She will have the same soul energy as us. A change in strength was nothing new. Ron had seen his former classmate, the fire magician god Eli, successfully become a priest. The fire element that she practiced turned into the light element. However, while she gained more strength, she was also completely brainwashed. That's not a problem. Ron agreed. As long as Shea is resurrected, I don't care even if she doesn't have any power. As her husband, I will protect her for the rest of my life. Lord Goosey, when can you start? Ron asked. He couldn't wait to revive Shea. Anytime, Goosey answered without hesitation. He smiled and said, of course it has to be at night. Besides, I need to make some preparations. No problem, Ron replied. You can use all your resources to do this. In order to resurrect Shea, I will do whatever it takes. Very good, Goosey said with a smile. He hesitated for a moment before saying, but Ron, Shea's soul was damaged after she was resurrected. Her personality might be. There will be some changes. You have to be mentally prepared. A change in personality? Ron was stunned for a moment, but he didn't think too much about it. The most important thing at that time was to revive Shea. The sun set in the west, and night fell. A huge square in front of the main entrance of the St. Paolo Palace, the capital of the Holy Roman Empire, was crowded with people. This was originally the place where the emperors of the Holy Roman Empire were placed. There were a total of 26 of them. But now, the huge statues had been removed, and the place had been cleared. Dozens of huge pillars were erected in the huge square. The pillars were engraved with ancient patterns, and the empty space in the center of the pillars was covered with complicated patterns, dazzling everyone who looked at it. It was a huge magic array. In the center of the magic array was Shea's corpse. At this moment, she was wearing her usual battle armor and was lying there quietly. Her long hair was spread out, and she looked as if she had fallen asleep. Outside the magic array, the main characters of the Scourge Church had all arrived. Homilin, Ron, Delin, Kay, Juliana, Cadena, Becerra, Rainey, Wrigglesford, Vivian and her team of necromancers, Lachlan and his Ebbia army, and so on. They surrounded the huge square so tightly that not even a drop of water could trickle through. Everyone had a hopeful look on their faces. When their gazes landed on the huge magic array on the ground, they couldn't help but feel more confident. Sister Shea, you must come back to life. Cadena stood at the side and prayed softly. The spacious square was filled with a solemn atmosphere. Tens of thousands of people stood quietly. Other than the sound of light breathing, even the sound of a needle dropping on the ground could be heard. The corpse wizard king, Goosey, was the main character of the night. At that moment, he was wearing a colorful wizard robe and a bone crown on his head. In his hand, he held a holy staff that was emitting a strange light. His bony face kept looking at the dark sky as if something was attracting him, or as if he was waiting for something. Not a single star could be seen in the dark sky. It was so quiet that it was frightening. In the darkness, a shooting star quietly streaked across the sky, leaving a long trail behind. At this moment, Goosey's gaze turned grave, and his turbid eyes shone with a luster. You can start, Goosey said in a deep voice. At this moment, he tapped the holy staff in his hand on the ground, and it hit a small hole in the huge magic array on the ground. That was the core of the huge magic array, and a dark green radiance quickly spread out along the magic array's patterns. In an instant, the whole magic array seemed as if it had come alive, and it emitted a faint radiance. After a short while, the whole magic array lit up, and its radiance shone in all directions. The spacious square was filled with dark green energy. Let's start. Ron clenched his fists, and his heart leaped to his throat. Even though he tried hard to keep a calm face, his shivering body betrayed his nervousness. Bolts of lightning started spreading from the inside and outside of the magic array like spiritual snakes, and they climbed onto the dozens of huge pillars. As crackling sounds echoed out, they jumped around incessantly. Goosey was mumbling something, and his hands kept changing their shapes. His skeleton-like body started twitching crazily, and it seemed as if he was having a seizure. The holy staff danced more and more quickly, and it turned into a phantom in the end. It didn't seem real. "Great Elder, what is he doing?" Ron asked curiously. "He's using the soul-summoning spell," Homelin replied thoughtfully. "When a person dies, their soul will scatter with the wind, but a corpse wizard can use a special method to gather the dead person's soul again and return it to his original body," Ron nodded. It was only now that he realized that undead magic was extensive and profound, and it wasn't as simple as he had imagined. Even though he was already an expert of the sacred domain, his understanding of undead magic was just the tip of the iceberg. Huh! At this moment, the corpse wizard King Goosey let out a loud shout, and his shivering body stopped abruptly. A beam of light green light hit the center of the giant magic array. In an instant, the whole magic array shone brightly, and it started operating crazily. The dozens of huge pillars seemed to have accumulated enough power, and dozens of beams of light shot into the sky. Boom! Dozens of beams of light converged into a single line in the sky, and they formed a magnificent scene. The light radiated in all directions, and it illuminated half of the sky. It wasn't just the palace of the Holy Roman Empire that was illuminated by the light green light. Even the whole St. Paulo city was covered in a layer of light green. My God, what is that? What an evil power! Heresy, heresy! Although the resistance of St. Paulo had been suppressed, most of the residents were still on the side of the Holy See. When they saw this scene, they couldn't help but curse. They lowered their voices, afraid that the scourged church would hear them. The power of the magic array shook the heavens and the earth, and it emitted a powerful force. It was like a miracle, and it caused the people of the scourged church to gasp in amazement. The Abia soldiers who hadn't established their faith were already convinced by the mysterious and powerful undead magic, and they began to make up their minds to join the scourged church. At this moment, countless white shadows appeared in the magic array. Those white shadows wriggled like spiritual snakes, and they slowly flew into the sky along the light pillars. Outside the magic array, a chilly wind blew, and the white shadows flew past. Shrill cries could be heard, and they sounded like howls from the depths of hell. Ron knew that those were the souls that had been summoned. Countless white shadows gathered in the sky, and they slowly formed a huge soul whirlpool. The whirlpool spun slowly, and it emitted a majestic soul energy that filled the entire space. "Look, what's that?" Rainie's eyes were sharp. She pointed at the soul whirlpool in the sky and shouted. The soul whirlpool emitted a powerful force, and it attracted everyone's attention, including Ron. He couldn't help but look in the direction of the sound. A human figure slowly appeared in the huge soul whirlpool, and it slowly descended. Shea. Ron's body shook violently, and a burst of ecstasy filled his heart. That human figure was none other than Shea. At this moment, her body was as illusory as a fog. It was just like the first time Ron saw Grandpa Homelin. She was a soul. It seems that Goosey's soul-summoning spell was successful. He actually managed to summon Shea's soul. Homelin stroked his beard and said with a smile, a satisfied look on his face, "Look, it's really Shea. Undead magic is amazing, unbelievable." The Abia soldiers opened their mouths in shock, and they started to discuss among themselves. Even the undead sorcerers had looks of disbelief in their eyes. Big Sister Shea. Kadina's eyes shone with joy, and her face was full of excitement. She couldn't help but grab Ron's arm tightly, looking nervous. In the sky, Shea's soul's eyes were tightly shut, and her soul energy was extremely weak. It was as if she was going to turn into a cloud of fog and disappear at any time. Ron saw this and couldn't help but worry. At this moment, the corpse wizard King Goosey's movements changed again. The holy bone staff in his hand suddenly reached out. "Rise!" With a low shout, Shea's corpse moved. Shaya's corpse slowly rose under the astonished gazes of everyone in the square. Shaya's eyes were still nervous. Her limbs hung down naturally, as if there was an invisible force supporting her. The soul descending from the sky and the corpse rising from the ground slowly approached each other. It's done. It's almost done. Ron's eyes shone with excitement. He could feel that Shaya's corpse was undergoing a subtle change. It was a reaction from the soul, and it was getting closer and closer to the soul. The corpse seemed to have a trace of life. Pung! Shaya's body and her soul had completely overlapped. In an instant, Shaya's body suddenly burst out with an intense radiance. The radiance was like the sun shining in all directions. The pitch-black sky became as bright as day, incomparably bright, and everyone was unable to open their eyes for a moment. Amidst the deep chanting, Shaya fiercely opened her beautiful eyes, and a bright light burst out from his eyes. At this moment, Shaya came back to life. Chapter 593. It's done. Ron was delighted, and his heart started thumping. Even though Shaya's aura was still that of a dead person, he didn't care. It was fine as long as Shaya's soul was in her body. The corpse wizard King Goosey seemed to have collapsed. His wizard robe was drenched in sweat, and his chest was heaving up and down. He had consumed a large amount of his soul energy. Silence. A deathly silence. Everyone opened their eyes wide and looked in disbelief at the figure in the sky. A dead person had come back to life. Shaya slowly stood still. She was clad in armor, and her beautiful long hair fluttered in the wind. She was expressionless as she swept her gaze over the crowd. "Shaya!" Ron shouted in pleasant surprise. He was about to go up to her when his heart suddenly shuddered. It was because he saw Shaya's gaze. Shaya's eyes coldly stared at him, and there was not a trace of emotion in his open eyes. Sister Shaya. Kadena couldn't restrain the joy in her heart. She cheered and was about to pounce on her. "Don't go." Ron pulled her back and said in a deep voice, "Something's wrong." "What's wrong?" "She's Sister Shaya. My intuition can't be wrong." Kadena shouted loudly. "She's Shaya, but—" Ron couldn't continue. He had a strange feeling about the current Shaya. He couldn't tell what this feeling was. Could it be that her power had changed? Or— Ron couldn't help but become hesitant. Homeland's expression changed. "It seems like something is wrong." At this moment, Shaya moved. She smiled coldly and waved her hand in the sky. A rumbling sound was heard, and the dark clouds in the sky split open. The countless souls in the whirlpool suddenly changed and rushed toward Shaya's body. Once the soul entered her body, Shaya's face revealed a happy expression. At the same time, her body exploded with a cold light. Ron was stunned. She's absorbing the soul energy in a magic array. After the resurrection of Shaya, a large amount of spiritual energy was left in the giant magic painting. These spiritual energies would have disappeared after completing their mission, but now, Shaya had absorbed them all. After absorbing a large amount of soul energy, Shaya's strength rose steadily. Her aura became more and more strange and powerful. A fierce aura shook the heavens and the earth, and a powerful force spread out unceasingly. The whole St. Paulo city was shrouded in fear, and even the calm ground began to tremble. An earthquake, an earthquake! The people on the ground were panicking. Even the usually calm Calamity Troop had a slight commotion. The power coming from the sky was too strong, and it gave people the urge to bow down and worship it. Homeland frowned. She's about to break through. "Ah!" Shaya let out a long howl that shook the sky. At the same time, her body emitted a fierce green light, shining on the ground like the sun. The powerful force spread out like a halo, and a whirlwind blew on the ground. The vast and boundless soul energy caused everyone to tremble from the depths of their souls. Under the influence of Shaya's power, countless rocks and trees were swept up into the air, constantly circling and dancing. The sacred domain. That was the power of the sacred domain. Shaya, who had been trapped at the master level in her life, had finally broken through the sacred domain after her death. The green light spread out suddenly, and for a moment, people could not open their eyes. Then, the world finally calmed down. Countless souls gradually dispersed, and Shaya's tall figure appeared in the sky. This. Ron was stunned. The Shaya in front of him whether it was her expression or temperament, had undergone a tremendous change. Ron stared blankly at Shea in the sky. Suddenly, it was as if she had become a completely different person. The armor on Shea's body had become a set of white bone armor. In front of the breastplate, there was a skull with a ferocious face. Its black eyes were filled with mystery and fear. Shea's shiny black hair had become a demonic white. Her clear eyes had become blood red, and the expression on her face was no longer as friendly as before. On the contrary, it was even more eerie. Shea stood there coldly. The power of the sacred domain exploded like a mountain, causing everyone to be unable to breathe. Of course, the experts of the sacred domain were excluded. His gaze swept down like lightning, sweeping across everyone's faces. In the end, he fixed his gaze on Ron. With a faint smile, his tall body slowly descended. Ka. After landing on the ground, Shea slowly walked towards Ron. Her hard bone armor rubbed against the blue stone on the ground, making ear-piercing sounds. Shea. Ron's chest seemed to be blocked by something. He wanted to say something, but when the words reached his mouth, he swallowed them back down. Sister Shea. Kadena cheered and ran forward, affectionately holding Shea's arm. Sister Shea, it's good that you're back. Shea's face was expressionless. She glanced at Kadena and coldly shook off her arm. She walked straight to Ron's side and slightly bowed, performing a standard knight salute. Resurrected Death Knight, Shea greets Master. This title made Ron stare blankly for a moment. How had he suddenly become Shea's master? He looked at Gusi with a puzzled expression. Gusi said, "Don't look at me. I don't know anything. However, I can feel that her soul has already connected with yours. In other words, she's now your guardian knight." Guardian Knight was a special title for knights. Magicians who were good at long-range attacks needed a close guard. Knights with strong defense were naturally the best choice. Some powerful magicians would have several knight squires. They would sign contracts and become their servants. Shea was the same. Kadena froze. She couldn't understand why the beautiful and optimistic Sister Shea would become like this. She was noble, elegant, strange, and powerful. Moreover, she had declared herself to be Ron's guardian knight. Sister Shea, you're our friend and Ron's lover. However, you're his death knight. Kadena pulled Shea's hand and said loudly. Ron also pulled Shea's hand and said emotionally, Shea, I don't need any guardian knight. I just need you by my side. Ron and Kadena's enthusiasm didn't get the same response from Shea. She only heard her coldly say, Master, please show some respect. I'm your guardian knight, not your woman, Ron had no choice but to let go of Shea's merciless rejection. He stood there at a loss. Was this really Shea? Ron couldn't help but ask himself. Facing such a Shea, Ron's expression was complicated. Shea faintly smiled, her snow-white long hair fluttering in the wind, revealing a strange and flirtatious charm. She glanced at Cardina, who was standing there in a daze, paused, and then coldly said, Under the witness of the god of death, the contract signed cannot be changed. From today onwards, Ron is my master, as well as the person I will protect for the rest of my life. Katina, I hope you understand this. Being able to call out Kadena's name meant that Shea didn't lose her memory. She still remembered everything that happened with the two of them. It was just that her personality had undergone a fundamental transformation. This kind of change made everyone who was familiar with her feel very unfamiliar. After the crowd dispersed and everyone returned to their rooms to rest, Ron dejectedly returned to Charles XXVI's palace. Recalling everything that happened tonight, it was like a dream. She raised her head slightly, only to see Shia following her step by step. Ron was stunned for a moment. Looking at the unfamiliar face, he blurted out, What's the matter? I am Master's guardian knight. Protecting Master is my duty. Shea replied mechanically. There was no expression on her face from beginning to end. Ron didn't know whether to laugh or cry. I've said it before. I don't need a guardian knight. Shea, although I don't know why you have become like this, I hope you understand your position in my heart. The rules of the contract signed under the god of death cannot be changed. Before Ron could finish, Shea interrupted coldly. As for being your woman, I have no interest. I am your guardian knight, and also your fighting tool. The relationship between us is just that, Shea's words made Ron speechless for a moment. He thought for a moment and sighed. Shea, are you really Shea? What is the reason for you to become like this? There was no answer. Shea just stared at him blankly. There was no expression on her cold face. At this time, Ron thought for a moment and asked Shea a few questions. Shea answered them one by one. Surprisingly, her answers were not wrong at all. That is to say, in the body of Shea in front of him, there was Shea's own soul, and it was not replaced by another soul. But Ron didn't understand why Shea would become like this. Looking at Shea's business-like expression, Ron only felt like a mouse pulling a turtle. He couldn't think of a better way to deal with her. He could only say, I want to rest. Shea, you should go back and rest too. Master, Shea doesn't need to rest. Shea replied coldly. She moved her heavy body to the door and sat down. Her eyes stared at him until he felt goosebumps. Ron didn't know what to do with Shea. Death Knights didn't need to rest, and corpses didn't get tired. Goosey, what is going on? After finally getting rid of Shea, Ron didn't even sleep. He was so angry that he went straight to Goosey, who was resting. He pulled him up and didn't even address him as second elder. Young master, I already said that I don't know. Feeling Ron's anger, Goosey's face turned bitter. After so many years of using the spirit summoning spell, this was the first time something like this had happened. The summoned soul returned to the body and even broke through the sacred domain. What was even more unbelievable was that Shea had signed some kind of contract with Ron. Young master, I seem to have told you that the resurrected Shea's temperament will change, so? Goosey said softly, trying to shirk his responsibility. But you didn't tell me that there would be such a change. Ron almost roared, the veins on his face bulging. Although the guy has Shea's memories, it's definitely not her. How could my Shea become like this? I want the real Shea, not a battle tool with the strength of the sacred domain. I really don't know, Goosey said with a long face. I saw that young master had been guarding a corpse all day, so I came up with this idea. The soul of the dead is scattered, and the soul that is reassembled will be tainted with some of the evil energy from hell. So, the resurrected soul will have some changes in personality disorder. Ron was stunned and fell silent. At this moment, Goosey said seriously, Young master, if you were to choose again, would you choose to resurrect Shea? Hearing this, Ron's heart couldn't help but tremble. Yes, even if he knew the result, would he resurrect Shea? Chapter 594. Mount Hygel, which was covered in snow all year round, was the Holy See's holy land for pilgrimage. The summit of Mount Hygel was where all the leaders of the Holy See cultivated and lived. It was peaceful, solemn, and not tainted by the bustle of the mortal world. The Holy See Cathedral at the foot of the mountain was usually crowded with tourists, but at this moment, not a single soul could be seen. All the soldiers of the Holy See had retreated to the peaks of the mountain, as if they were facing a great enemy. At the foot of Mount Hygel, countless undead armies had already gathered. The tall, blood-red skull flag was fluttering in the wind. Hundreds of thousands of ghouls, zombies, and crypt demon kings were constantly roaring. Their bodies emitted a strong aura of death. On the land of Mount Hygel, the land that once symbolized holiness and immortality was polluted. Wherever the undead army went, it turned into a greenish-black color. Death Knight Shaya was standing on a small slope. Her eyes were slightly squinted, revealing a demonic red color. She was wearing a thick bone armor, and her long white hair was like the wind, casually fluttering in the wind. What Shaya was riding wasn't the original unicorn, but a nightmare beast. The nightmare beast's body was burning with hellfire. It could control flames and mental attacks. It had a red horse mane and tail hair that fluttered like flames. Its four hooves had the power of chaos, and it could float in the air. The nightmare beast was not a fallen unicorn, because the soul of a unicorn that mastered the mysteries of life and death would never fall under the protection of nature. Nightmare beasts were transformed from the souls of warhorses that had died on the battlefield and were filled with hatred. Their bodies were wrapped in a terrifying aura, and they breathed out flames that could burn everything. Their bodies flowed with blazing magma. Other than creatures that were immune to mental attacks and didn't know fear, all creatures that were attacked by nightmare beasts would be shrouded in fear and wouldn't dare to fight against them. Shea, who was riding on the back of the nightmare beast, stood in the midst of the terrifying undead creatures, adding to her demonic and terrifying aura. Kadena stood behind Shea. She was standing so close to Shea, but their hearts felt so far apart. Although Shea was still Shea, she was no longer the Shea she was familiar with. Kadena looked at Shea's back and sighed silently. Ron glanced at Shea and slowly retracted his gaze. Now that the war was approaching, he had no time to think about Shea. Now, the most important thing was to destroy the Holy See. Ron stared at the peaceful main peak of Mount Hygel quietly. 100,000 years ago, the Holy See led an army of various races to besiege the Undercity. They raised their butcher's knife against the Scourge Church and wiped out all the necromancers, causing necromancy magic to disappear from the entire continent. Now, the time for revenge had come. Everything would be completely settled. Ron's eyes were burning with fighting spirit. It was the flame of hatred that had accumulated over 100,000 years. The power of this hatred was enough to devour him. At this time, Ron raised the dragon bone staff in his hand and waved it forward. The goal is to destroy the Holy See and flatten Mount Hygel. Attack. With Ron's order, hundreds of thousands of undead creatures moved. Under the command of the necromancers and death knights, they majestically charged towards Mount Hygel. Walking corpses, skeletons, crypt demon kings, and other undead creatures swarmed towards Mount Hygel. Kill. Shea, the death knight, took the lead. She rode the nightmare beast and charged towards the main peak of Mount Hygel like a whirlwind. The huge nightmare beast stomped its four hooves, leaving a charred black mark on the cold snow. It was constantly emitting green smoke. Death entanglement. Shea shouted. She waved the holy sword in her hand, and a green mass of air blasted out at the same time. The gate was smashed open, and sawdust splattered everywhere. With just this, the gate was blasted open, and the passage to Mount Hygel was opened. Those damned heretics are here. Kill them. The movements outside had already alarmed the soldiers of the Holy See who were guarding the main roads of Mount Hygel. Those soldiers who were full of piety shouted and charged forward. In the face of the sudden appearance of the sacred domain powerhouses and the dense undead army, their faces were full of the will to die. Go to hell. Shea's eyes flashed. The nightmare beast swept past like a whirlwind, and several heads flew up. One by one, the Holy See soldiers became headless ghosts. Kill, kill, kill. Under the leadership of Shea, the undead army of the Scourge Church was like a tiger entering a flock of sheep. They wantonly slaughtered and wiped out the resistance of the Holy See. Boom! Under the attack of the undead army, the huge holy cathedral fell in the flames of war and burned fiercely, symbolizing the complete decline of the Holy See. Lady Shea is so powerful, follow Lady Shea. Shea's strength bloomed like a flower, causing everyone to be amazed and envious. Everyone in the Scourge Church respected this powerful death knight from the bottom of their hearts. Ron looked at Shea's back and took a deep breath. His expression was complicated, but he had to admit that Shea's strength was beyond his expectations. However, Ron didn't want this. He didn't need a powerful Shea, but a Shea who loved him like before. Just as Shea was wantonly slaughtering, she suddenly heard the sound of wind flashing behind her head. She quickly dodged, and a bone shield appeared in her hand, blocking the incoming attack. Shea took a closer look and saw that it was the commander of the guards of the Hall of Guardians, the fiery dragon knight Helen. Helen snorted coldly, his eyes full of murderous intent. A mere knight dares to behave atrociously in Mount Hygel. Go to hell. You're the one who's going to die. Shea's face revealed a sinister smile. The Holy See is done for. There's no power that can stop the army of catastrophes. Go to hell. Hypocrites, you're courting death. Helen's knight spear and Shea's long sword collided fiercely. Their momentum exploded like a mountain, and a whirlwind blew at the place where the two of them confronted each other. The Dragon Knight and the Death Knight exchanged dozens of blows in an instant. The powerful force shook the surroundings and shattered the ice and snow that had been silent for thousands of years. Go and kill him. As Shea, who was in the vanguard, was entangled with Helen, Ron had already led the army of catastrophes to attack. He was worried about Shea's safety and ordered the army to attack Helen as soon as he saw him. What? Retreat. The appearance of Ron and the army of catastrophes shocked Helen. He didn't dare to continue fighting and fled after forcing Shea to retreat. Death Coil. Frost Nova. Shea and Ron released their prided skills one after another, intending to stop Heron from escaping. Their battle skills formed an intimidating force, and with the snowy mountain as the center, it fiercely spread out. The powerful aura even caused an avalanche. Damn it, he actually escaped. After the avalanche, Ron and Shea looked at the place where they attacked, but Helen was nowhere to be seen. Shea said with frustration. Her snow-white hair fluttered in the wind, and her cold face was full of ferocity. It's okay, he can't escape. Ron smiled and didn't think much of Helen's escape. Don't forget, Mount Hyjal is behind him. Even if he escapes, where can he escape to? Let's chase after him. Shea gritted her teeth and said with hatred. The great elder Homelin and the second elder of the Scourged Church, Goosey, were far behind and didn't participate in the attack. As the core members of the Scourged Church, such a battle was enough to leave it to Ron, Shea, and a group of young people. The Holy See's strength had been greatly reduced and was far from being a match for the Scourged Church. After today, the Holy See will be completely synonymous with history. Goosey looked at Mount Hyjal quietly, his eyes full of hatred. Back then, they attacked the Undercity like this and wanted to slaughter all of us. They also completely destroyed the Scourged Church. Today, I will let them have a taste of the same. Goosey's face was full of malevolence. He was someone who had experienced the decline of the Scourged Church, and his hatred for the Holy See was irreconcilable. It's still too early to say such things. Homelin stared at the main peak of Mount Hyjal and frowned. I don't know why, but I feel uneasy. I can't help but feel uneasy. I have a premonition that things won't go so smoothly today. Will they? Goosey's mummified face revealed a smile that looked ferocious and terrifying. I don't believe that the Holy See will be able to turn the situation around under the powerful attack of the Scourged Church. Homelin didn't answer. His eyes flashed with deep worry. Lord Pope, the Scourge army has attacked. In the Temple of God on Mount Hyjal, the commander of the Temple of Protection, the fiery dragon knight Helen, knelt on the ground and reported to Pope. There were only 3 people sitting at the table in the middle of the spacious Temple of God. They were Pope Ernst, Guangming Judge Ivan, and fiery dragon knight Helen. There were 7 empty seats, but unfortunately, their owners were no longer there. There were hundreds of people around the table. They were fully armed and looked solemn. These were the last elites of the Holy See, and also the last resistance force. Are they already attacking? Pope Ernst was sitting on the throne in the middle of the temple. He looked haggard, as if he had aged a few decades in an instant. He muttered, "They really came quickly, just as Ernst expected. After the Holy See's holy war failed, the Scourge army counterattacked like thunder. They destroyed the Holy Roman Empire in a very short time and led the army to attack Mount Hyjal." The speed of the Scourge army was extremely fast, much faster than he had expected. "Lord Pope, what should we do now?" Helen asked. He raised his voice, and his tone was full of anxiety. "Our believers are either dead or injured. We don't have any power to resist the attack of the Scourge Church anymore." As soon as Helen finished speaking, there was a commotion outside the Temple of God. Everyone's expression changed when they heard this. The Scourge army was so fast that they had already started attacking the main peak of Mount Hyjal. Boom! There was a loud sound, and a bloody corpse was thrown in. It cracked a big hole in the roof of the Temple of God. The broken corpse was still squirming, and a faint green gas spread out. It emitted a strong stench that made people want to vomit. The meat grinder was the Scourge army's powerful offensive machine. It could grind the collected corpses into meat paste and then throw them out. As one of their means of attack, it was very powerful. The infected corpse could even spread the plague. The Scourge army had arrived. This news cast a shadow over everyone's face in the Temple of God. They looked at Lord Pope, who was sitting in the middle of the throne. They gritted their teeth and waited quietly for his orders. In the Temple of Judgment, Guangming Judge Ivan stood up and said loudly, "Your Majesty Pope, these heretics are so aggressive. At most, we will fight to the death with them. Yes, fight to the death with them. We would rather die than surrender." As soon as Ivan finished speaking, everyone in the Temple of God started shouting. They were all excited, and their eyes were full of fanaticism. They looked as if they were ready to die. Chapter 595. In the face of the agitated crowd, Pope and Ernst did not express their opinions, which was a rare occurrence. "Lord Pope, please say something." Seeing that the scourge's attack was getting stronger and stronger, Chief Judge Ivan of Guangming was a little anxious. "As long as you give the order, we will tear those evil heretics into pieces." Ernst still did not move. At this time, he seemed to have made up his mind. He gritted his teeth and stood up, looking at the people around him. "Actually, we have not reached the point of despair yet. At least, there is still a way to get out of our current predicament." When everyone heard this, they were stunned for a moment. Not the point of despair yet? The Scourge army had already attacked Mount Hyjal. If it was not the point of despair, then what was the point of despair? "What is it?" Ivan asked. "Communicate with God and respectfully ask for God's instructions." Ernst's drooping eyelids lifted, and a glimmer of light flashed in his eyes. The Scourge's advance was unprecedentedly smooth. The towering and majestic mountain peaks were piled with corpses in white. They were all fanatical believers of the Holy See, or zealots for short. They did not care about their low strength and poor equipment, and with passion and devotion to God Guangming, they launched an attack on the Scourge army. Look, unfortunately, the attack was in vain. These devout believers of God were quickly torn into pieces by the undead army of the Scourge Church, and then became delicious snacks for the ghouls. The burning cathedral, the remnants of the miracle, and the picture of the Virgin Mary were gradually engulfed by the fire. The whole of Mount Hyjal was shrouded in an atmosphere of despair. Ron sighed slightly. He could understand the despair of the Holy See. Because of Shea's resurrection, his hatred for the Curia had decreased a lot. The palace of God on the highest peak of Mount Hyjal was covered with a faint curtain of light. Ron knew that this was their last resistance. After the initial confusion, Ron understood that he wasn't alone. He was shouldering the future and hope of the Scourge Church. He couldn't let his emotions affect his decisions. Ron's mind gradually became firm. Destroy the Holy See. Leave no one alive. Ron's eyes were filled with a strong, killing intent as he gave the order to attack. Countless undead armies stepped on the ground of Mount Hyjal, and their roars made the whole earth tremble. "Kill!" Vivian's eyes turned red. She waved her staff and summoned a large number of skeletons. Wrigglesford also commanded the undead army to attack. As for Ron's Death Knight, Shea, she had already taken the lead and charged out. Just as the Scourge Church was about to launch their attack and the Holy See, which had stood tall for thousands of years, was about to be destroyed, the situation suddenly changed. Countless clouds were swept up, and the space on Mount Hyjal began to fluctuate. Cracks spread out, and then the flowing wind began to spin. A huge vortex appeared between heaven and earth. The vortex revealed a power so strong that it made one's heart tremble. "What is that?" Ron looked at the change in the sky and was stunned. The power revealed by the vortex made even him, a powerhouse of the sacred domain, feel terrified. Space crack. Homelin looked at the vortex that was constantly spinning in the sky and frowned. He sighed slightly. It really came. With a rumble, the sky seemed to have split open. Thousands of thunderbolts descended, as if the vast and unpredictable power of the heavens had descended. The hundreds of thousands of undead army were so shocked by this earth-shattering power that they couldn't move. "Ron, stop!" Accompanied by a dignified and clear voice, it faintly sounded from the horizon. "Frigga." Hearing this voice and feeling this familiar and powerful aura, Ron's expression suddenly froze. The one who came to stop Ron was none other than the chairman of the Parliament of the Noah continent, a powerhouse of the divine realm, fairy dragon Frigga. What's going on? Didn't she leave the Noah continent to do a mission in another plane? Why did she appear here? Hearing Frigga's voice, Ron was shocked and angry. He was shocked that the powerhouse of the Parliament had actually returned, and angry that Frigga, as the chairman, actually interfered in the grudge between the Scourged Church and the Holy See. Facing a powerful powerhouse of the divine realm, no one dared to act rashly, including the Scourged Church's strongest sacred necromancer, Homelin. At this moment, he was shrouded in a black robe and sent a message to Ron through the soul. Ron, be careful. Don't act rashly. In the Hall of God on the main peak of Mount Hygel, when they heard this voice, joy appeared on everyone's faces. It's the chairman. It's the chairman's voice. Herlin said excitedly. The powerhouses of the divine realm have finally returned. The chairman is here. We're saved. Ivan also breathed a sigh of relief, and a smile appeared on his face. The appearance of Chairman Frigga represented the return of the powerhouses of the Parliament and the end of the war. Most people in the hall did not know what had happened. The Parliament was too far away from them. In the Noah continent, many people did not know of the existence of the Parliament. Those who did not have the strength of the sacred domain could not even get close to the Parliament. However, they could clearly feel the shocking pressure that came from that voice. At least these people knew that this powerhouse was here to help them. After Ernst heard Frigga's voice, he was not too happy. Instead, he sighed silently. Ron's face was cold. He waved his hand slightly, and the hundreds of thousands of undead army immediately stopped. He shouted coldly, Frigga, what do you mean by this? The Scourged Church is not a member of the Parliament. Everything that we do has nothing to do with the Parliament. You have no right to interfere. You're wrong, Ron. Frigga's voice faintly came from afar. As long as something happens in the Noah continent, it has something to do with the Parliament. The purpose of the Parliament is to mediate the conflicts between the powerhouses of the sacred domain and maintain the peace of the Noah continent. The war between the Scourged Church and the Holy See was so great that it almost engulfed the entire human world. It caused the entire human world to be in misery and suffering. If the Parliament does not come out to mediate and uphold justice, I'm afraid that one day, the entire human world of the Noah continent will cease to exist. Uphold justice? Bah! Ron was furious when he heard this. He spat fiercely and retorted loudly. When the Holy See took the initiative to start a holy war and attack the Scourged Church, where was the Parliament? When the Undercity was besieged and helpless, where was the Parliament? Ron's series of questions made the voice in the sky fall silent. It was rare that there was no rebuttal. Ron paused for a moment. His eyes were burning with the flames of fury as he continued. And when we launched the war of vengeance and were about to annihilate the enemies who were about to kill us in one fell swoop, your council came out to mediate. You even said that you were upholding justice. Fuck your justice. Fuck your councils. We, the Calamity Church, will not accept this kind of double standard. This kind of justice will also bring shame to the councils. Ron cursed loudly. His words were reasonable and powerful, making Frigga unable to refute. She suddenly fell silent. The vortex in the sky did not speak for a long time. Ron straightened his back, his eyes flashing fiercely. He raised his unyielding head and quietly waited for the other party's response. After a long time, a faint voice came from the vortex in the sky, full of helplessness. Ron, come with me for a moment. What? Ron frowned. He did not know how to refuse this request. Ron, be careful, Kadena whispered to Ron. I don't know if it's a conspiracy. Ron, I'm worried about your safety. Kadena was worried that the Parliament would harm Ron. It shouldn't be. Ron pondered for a moment and said, since the Parliament wants to mediate, they won't do anything to me. Besides, with Frigga's strength, there's no need for her to play such tricks with me. Ron decided to meet Frigga. The Parliament was powerful, and the Scourged Church could not compete with them. Since he could not beat them, it was better to talk. After thinking about it again and again, Ron decided to go. Homelin also encouraged him through soul communication. Go. Bow your head when you need to, but there's one thing you can't back down on when it comes to principles. Homelin had already expected that they would not be able to achieve their goal of destroying the Holy See today. When the divine realm masters of the Parliament appeared, he knew that things were going to be bad. Ron looked around and shouted coldly, Scourge Army, retreat 30 miles to the foot of Mount Hygel and wait for orders. Hearing Ron's order, all the generals of the Scourge Army showed extreme reluctance. They were about to destroy the Holy See, but the last moment they were interrupted. No one would feel good about it. No one spoke, and no one protested. The hundreds of thousands of undead army of the Scourge Church obeyed Ron's order and retreated in the blink of an eye. Mount Hygel returned to its usual calm. When the Scourge Army retreated, the pressure in the hearts of everyone in the Holy See was lifted. The Parliament rarely showed its existence in front of the world, but today, a mere voice was enough to make the undead army of hundreds of thousands retreat. Some people began to be curious about the existence of the Parliament. In the great hall of the Palace of God's Sayings, Ivan, the chief judge of the Guangming court, had a relaxed smile on his face. Haha, the war is over. It seems that the lords of the Parliament don't like Ron at all. Lord Pope, do you think the lords of the Parliament will stand on our side? Ernst looked at Ivan with a trace of dissatisfaction in his eyes. He reprimanded, Elder Ivan, you've been in the Parliament for a long time. Why are you still so naive? What is the strength of the Scourge Church now? What is our strength now? What makes you think that the lords of the divine realm of the Parliament will stand on our side? No matter which continent it was, the strong were respected. The Scourge Church was now very powerful, while the Holy See's strength had been greatly reduced. Ernst knew very well that the so-called mediation of the Parliament might not stand on their side. It was very likely that they would sacrifice their interests to appease the Scourge Church. Ivan was at a loss for words after being questioned by Ernst. He could only keep his mouth shut. Ernst did not reprimand him further. He raised his head slightly and looked out of the big hole that was smashed by the meat grinder. Through the heavy fog, Ernst's face had a trace of depth as he spoke faintly. There's one more thing that you're wrong about. The war is far from over. On the contrary, our war with the Scourge Church has just begun. Chapter 596. Ron's body moved, and he slowly rose into the sky. Shea wanted to follow, but she was stopped by Ron with a wave of his hand. She had no choice but to give up. Ron plunged into the vortex, and the vortex slowly closed until it completely disappeared. It was as if it had never appeared, and the sky above Mount Hygel regained its calm. After passing through Frigga's space crack, Ron came to an unfamiliar place. This was a peaceful manor. As far as the eye could see, it was green. It was like spring all year round, and the air was filled with the strong smell of grass. Ron took a deep breath and felt comfortable all over. Even his body and mind became happy. At this moment, a voice came from behind him. Ron, you're here. Ron looked back and saw a woman standing behind him. She was looking at him with a smile. The woman was extremely beautiful. In terms of beauty, she was not inferior to Kadena. She even had an additional cold temperament compared to Kadena. This woman was the chairman of the Parliament of the Noah continent, a powerhouse in the divine realm, fairy dragon Frigga. She was wearing a commoner's blue dress, just like an ordinary commoner's girl. However, such attire couldn't hide her natural beauty. Upon seeing Frigga, Ron could not help but be stunned. It was not the first time he had seen Frigga, but when this goddess who stood at the peak of the Noah continent was so close to him, he was also stunned by Frigga's beauty. It was not only her appearance, but also her temperament. The temperament of a powerhouse was not something that ordinary women had. A philosopher once said that the beauty of a woman did not lie in her appearance, but in her temperament. Visera was also very beautiful, but she did not have such a temperament. Standing in front of Frigga, she was easily inferior. Being stared at by Ron in a daze, Frigga's face flashed with a blush. She reached out her hand and gently pinched Ron's cheek. What? Ron, don't you remember me? I even hugged you when I was young. Ah, Mr. Speaker. Ron finally came back to his senses. Embarrassed by his behavior just now, he stuttered out a greeting. Sorry, I lost my composure just now. Nothing. Frigga smiled sweetly and said gracefully, speaking of which, I have to sincerely apologize to you for something. Ron looked at Frigga in confusion. Frigga smiled. Regarding the matter of me declaring you as my fiancé in dragons, it caused you a certain amount of trouble. At that time, I was so annoyed by the matter of marriage that I casually made up an excuse to deceive them. At that time, I really thought you were dead. If I knew you were still alive, I definitely wouldn't have done that, Frigga said with a smile. She reached out to roll up her blue robe and gracefully bowed. Ron, I sincerely apologize to you. Please forgive my mistake. Forget it, it's all in the past. Ron sighed slightly and said magnanimously. Frigga not only caused him trouble, but also brought him a great deal of trouble. Ranaria's strength was not a joke. At that time, he could only escape, but of course he was not afraid now. Actually, I'm not wrong. We did have an engagement at that time. Frigga winked playfully and then changed the topic, but now I know that you already have a fiancé, and it's a great beauty. Hee. Ron, congratulations, thank you. Ron took a deep breath, calmed his mind, and changed into a serious tone. Mr. Speaker, I think you didn't call me here to reminisce about the past. Frigga's expression did not change. She still had a warm smile on her face. She looked at Ron with a trace of affection. Affection? Ron almost thought that he had seen wrongly. How could the high and mighty Mr. Speaker have an expression like a mother looking at her own son? No, it should be the feeling of an older sister looking at her youngest brother. Ron, you're very good, really very good. Frigga did not answer Ron's question. She stared at Ron's face, and a trace of tears appeared in the corner of her eyes. Her voice also had a trace of trembling. At this time, Frigga quickly turned around and looked away. She quietly stared into the distance and did not speak. Ron also fell silent because he did not know what to say. After a long time, Frigga calmed down and said faintly, Ron, stop. It's enough now. No. When Ron heard this, he flatly refused. The Holy See has always wanted to destroy our Scourge Church. When you were not around, they brazenly launched a holy war to exterminate the Scourge Church and exterminate the necromancers. Now that we have such an opportunity, how can we let go of this scourge? Perhaps Mr. Speaker does not know, but 100,000 years ago, Ron recounted the events of 100,000 years ago. He then paused and said in a low voice, the hatred between the Holy See and the Scourge Church can never be resolved. It can only be completely ended when one side falls. I've heard some things about the Amros continent 100,000 years ago. Frigga replied with a silent sigh after hearing this. At this time, she turned around and fixed her gaze on Ron. She bit her lip and said faintly, Ron, are you willing to listen to a story? Being swept by Frigga's pair of eyes that were as clear as water, Ron only felt a great shock in his heart. At this moment, he did not know how to refuse. Frigga glanced at Ron, as if looking away, and said to herself, about 50,000 years ago, the entire Noah continent was the world of magical beasts. At that time, the territory of the orcs was not so big, and the territory of the elves did not change at all. As for the human world, Frigga shook her head. There was no human world at that time. Ron understood that the Noah continent was originally a place where magical beasts dominated everything. The powerful magical beasts occupied every corner of the continent. The orcs and elves relied on their powerful talents to struggle for survival in the Noah continent, while the humans did not even have the right to stand and speak. Ron sneered. Mr. Speaker, what are you trying to say? Are you trying to say that the magical beasts are noble and elegant? Or are you trying to say that the existence of the human world is a gift from the magical beasts? As if she did not hear Ron's sarcasm, Frigga directly continued. At that time, there was no kingdom of magical beasts, and the magical beasts were not unified. Instead, they were scattered all over the place, each having their own territory. The magical beasts at that time valued their own territory very much, and could not tolerate the invasion of other magical beasts. Those powerful magical beasts often fought endlessly over the issue of territory. In the end, the powerful magical beasts won and occupied the largest and best territory on the continent, while the weak races were either swallowed up, swallowing their humiliation and following the powerful races, becoming their vassals, or being driven to barren places to live. After continuous annexation, there were two powerful races in the Noah continent. No, to be precise, there were two racial forces. The two racial forces each led an innumerable number of vassal races. In order to fight for territory, disagreements were incessant, and some even became mortal enemies. Of these two races, One was the dragons, and the other was the Beaumont clan. This issue finally erupted one day. Frigga's voice trembled as she spoke. The leader of the dragons at that time, the fiery, colossal dragon, and the king of the Beaumont clan, the golden Beaumont behemoth, finally broke out in a war in order to fight for the leadership of the Noah continent. That war was extremely tragic, and almost all the races of the Noah continent were involved. They fought until the sky turned dark and the earth turned dark, and the people were plunged into misery and suffering. Even the entire continent was fragmented and almost destroyed. It was only when Lord Noah returned that this foolish and drawn-out war was stopped. Ron's heart was filled with shock. The powerful dragons and the equally powerful Beaumont clan fought. What kind of scene was that? I'm afraid half of the continent was directly destroyed. At this point, Frigga glanced at Ron and sighed slightly. Ron, what I want to tell you is that there were no winners in this war. Whether it was the dragons, the Beaumont clan, or other races, we all lost. We all lost. The direct impact was that the dragons and the Beaumont clan directly declined sharply, and they still haven't recovered to this day. Some of the weaker magical beasts never rose again, and some even disappeared directly. The major races became independent, and the orcs and humans began to rise. That war was later called the War of the Magical Beasts. That was a war with no winners, and it wasn't recorded in the history books. Frigga said calmly, after this war, the kingdom of magical beasts was born, and only then was the Parliament born. This was also established to resolve the disputes between the various powerhouses, and its purpose was to achieve peace in the Noah continent. Frigga sighed. Ron, now you know why I stopped you. Don't tell me that the 100,000 years of enmity between the Scourge Church and the Holy See should be forgotten, just like that? Ron clenched his fists, and his eyes reddened. Thinking of a scene just now, his eyes were filled with intense unwillingness. Just one more step, and he would have achieved his goal. As if she had seen through Ron's thoughts, Frigga sighed. Ron, you underestimate the Holy See too much. I dare say that if the war continued, the Scourge Church might not be able to gain any advantage. The Holy See's background is not that simple. Ron did not listen to Frigga's words, and even snorted. In his opinion, most of the powerhouses of the Holy See in the sacred domain had fallen, and the sacred army had been completely wiped out. They had no power to resist at all, and were like meat on a chopping board, waiting to be slaughtered. Ron did not give up and asked, Is there really no other way? No, Frigga answered straightforwardly. She stared at Ron seriously. I am a chairman of the Parliament of the Noah continent. I can't allow you to act recklessly. Besides, this is the decision of all the powerhouses of the divine domain in the Parliament. It's not my decision alone. Frigga's meaning was very clear. If Ron insisted on doing things his own way, it would mean that he would become an enemy of all the powerhouses of the divine domain in the Parliament. Ron did not even dare to think about the consequences. He knew very well what it meant to become an enemy of the Parliament. The Parliament held the highest level of power in the Noah continent. Ron thought about it for a while and finally gave in. Although he was unwilling, he could only submit at this time. At this moment, Ron raised his head and looked at Frigga's delicate and beautiful face. He took a deep breath and asked a question. Frigga, if I refuse to carry out the Parliament's decision, will you take action against me? Frigga trembled. She did not expect Ron to ask this question. She hesitated for a moment, bit her lips, and answered with a sigh. She shook her head and replied, Ron, you shouldn't ask this. At the joint meeting of the Parliament, under the witness of all the senators and councillors, the Scourge Church and the Holy See began a difficult peace negotiation. During the negotiation, a fierce argument broke out. Both sides refused to give in to each other regarding the demarcation of power. Ron's idea was to use Mount Hygel as the boundary, and then take the entire Holy Roman Empire into his pocket, leaving only Mount Hygel for the Holy See. With such harsh conditions, the Holy See naturally did not agree. He advocated restoring the original borders of the Holy Roman Empire, and the Scourge Church's power could not take a step into the Holy Roman Empire. Recognizing the Kingdom of Ebbia was their bottom line. This time, it was Ron's turn to be dissatisfied. Now that the entire Holy Roman Empire had been annexed by the Scourge Church, and even the emperor had been captured, this was equivalent to making him spit out what he had eaten. Of course, Rom would not accept it. Because territory meant population and territory meant believers, both sides could not reach an agreement. On the issue of principle, neither side was willing to give in. They even almost started a fight during the negotiation, but they were stopped by Parliament Speaker Frigga. In the end, under the pressure of the Parliament led by Frigga, both sides agreed to use the Rhine River as the boundary to restore the Holy Roman Empire, restore Charles XXVI's royal status, and upgrade the Kingdom of Ebbia to the Ebbia Empire. This was equivalent to taking away a large part of the Holy Roman Empire's territory, and the territories of both sides were basically equal. Ernst could not say anything about such an agreement, but he could not resist the pressure of the Parliament and agreed. Although Ron was not satisfied, he had no choice but to reluctantly agree in the end. The peace agreement between both sides was signed under the witness of the Parliament, which meant that the war and conflict had officially ended. Ron ordered the Scourge to retreat to the south of the Rhine River and release the royal family of Charles XXVI. Of course, before they left, they could not avoid plundering and taking away a large amount of wealth before returning to the newly established Ebbia Empire. The war between the Holy See and the Scourge Church had finally come to an end, and the turbulent human world had once again regained its peace. However, many people, including everyone in the Parliament, knew that this was only a temporary peace. The conflict between the Holy See and the Scourge Church would not be resolved so quickly, and it would not be resolved at all. At the northernmost tip of the Noah continent, there was a place called the Extreme Ice Field. This was basically a barren land, and the climate was cold. Even the bravest adventurer team did not dare to go to this place, and it was called one of the most deadly places in the Noah continent. On this day, however, an uninvited guest was welcomed. Heavy snow blew in their faces, and the whistling cold wind hurt their faces. A short old man was walking slowly on the glacier, unafraid of the bone-piercing cold wind. At this time, the old man walked to a large crack and stopped in front of it. This large crack was a few hundred meters long, and, at a glance, it was bottomless. "It's here." The old man narrowed his eyes and quietly looked around, and his eyes revealed a satisfied look. "I didn't expect this small continent to have such a good place. The Extreme Ice Field, hee. This place is the most suitable place for it to hatch," the old man said slowly, and a smile appeared on his face. At this time, he carefully took out a shiny object from his back pocket. This was the it that the old man was talking about. It was an egg of an unknown creature. A faint pattern appeared on the egg's shell, and as the pattern moved, it emitted a strong power. The old man was holding an egg of a strange creature, but the power contained in the egg was very terrifying. It was obvious that the creature inside the egg was a terrifying creature. The old man casually threw the egg into the crack of the glacier. The egg fell to the bottom of the glacier, a height of several thousand meters. The egg fell down, but it was unscathed. Its seemingly fragile shell was terrifyingly hard. As soon as the egg fell to the bottom, it was stuck in the crack of the glacier. At this moment, the egg moved and emitted a strange light. The surrounding cold air was completely absorbed by the strange egg, not letting go of a single bit. After absorbing the cold energy, the energy inside the egg began to become active. Traces of life energy began to slowly seep in, constantly throbbing, hee. This is the third one. The old man's eyes revealed a trace of light. "I just need to wait a few more years, and my plan will be completed." The old man slowly raised his eyes and looked at the sky. He fiercely clenched his fists, and a trace of hatred flashed in his eyes. Chapter 597. The Undercity was shrouded in a thin layer of mist. Not far away was the main city's graveyard and cemetery. There was also the towering Hall of the Dead, giving off an eerie and serene atmosphere. Undercity now had all kinds of buildings. Not to mention other things, even its defense had been greatly enhanced. In the face of war, it would no longer panic. Unlike the bustling city, the streets of Undercity were unusually quiet. There were not many people on the streets. From time to time, there would be a few believers of the catastrophe in black robes walking on the quiet streets. After passing through a wide staircase, they came to the underground of Undercity. Compared to the surface, it was like another world. There were many shops here, and it was bustling with activity. The transparent display windows were filled with a dazzling array of goods. Weapons, armor, beautiful clothes, all kinds of medicines, everything one could think of. Merchants and mercenaries from all over the continent shuttled back and forth, bargaining with the owners of the shops. This was the underground world of Undercity. It was a huge space formed by the continuous expansion of Manchester's basement. There were palaces, shops, and roads that extended along the underground river, as if there was no end. Countless magic lamps flickered faintly above their heads, providing illumination to the underground world. Although the light here was not as dazzling as outside, and was a little gloomy, it was free from the sun and rain. It was one of the largest commercial cities on the Noah continent. Many chambers of commerce had opened up their businesses here. Many people liked to trade here. The calm and unconventional atmosphere here was unforgettable. Even the Mercenary Guild had set up a large stronghold here. The Mercenary Guild opened a stronghold, not a small station or tavern. This was enough to prove that the Mercenary Guild valued Undercity. In fact, Undercity had become one of the busiest places in the Noah continent, second only to the Mercenary Guild headquarters. Here, thousands of mercenaries would appear every day and leave hurriedly after receiving a mission. There were many people and money here, so naturally, there were many opportunities. The mercenaries naturally knew how to choose. They swarmed over like sharks smelling blood. In just a few months, Undercity had become one of the busiest cities in the Noah continent. In Undercity, the most profitable business was not the taverns, dance halls, or brothels. It was the shops that sold potions. The shops here sold a special kind of health potion. It was cheap and effective, so it was very popular among the mercenaries. Moreover, this kind of health potion could only be bought in Undercity. Because the supply of health potion could not meet the demand, it was not available to other cities for the time being. It was said that several large merchant guilds were fighting over the right to sell the health potion. Fatty Gid had been riding high recently. Ever since the war between the Scourge Church and the Holy See ended, he had risen like a shooting star. Now, not only in Undercity, but also in the entire Noah continent, including World of Warcraft, everyone knew his name. He was the owner of the Calamity Merchant Guild. He took care of all matters related to money in the Scourge Church for Ron. So far, he had been doing a good job, and the Calamity Merchant Guild was making a lot of money every day. This was because the fatty had the right to sell 2 potions. One was health potion, and the other was stamina potion. Whether it was a large merchant guild, a country, or a mercenary group, they all had to buy these 2 potions from him. Even magical beasts were no exception. Even some magical beasts in the sacred domain had to show a flattering smile when facing this fatty who was only at the level of a novice. Everyone knew that this fatty was the brother of the young master of the Scourge Church, Ron. He was one of the people Ron trusted the most. Ever since they defeated the Holy See, the Scourge Church was no longer the same as before. All the forces in the Noah continent looked at the Scourge Church in a new light. Naturally, the fatty's status rose as well. No matter how weak he was, there were still people who gave him face. At this moment, the fatty was in his office, discussing some business with the patriarch of a family from the kingdom of magical beasts. The Iron Bull family of magical beasts. Every member of the family was tall and muscular. Even if they transformed into human form, they were still very tall and sturdy. What? A single bottle of health potion costs 1,380 gold coins? The patriarch of the Iron Bull family opened his eyes wide. He was sitting on a chair. When he heard the price, he almost jumped up. F***CK, so expensive? He had come to Undercity on behalf of the Iron Bull family to purchase health potions on a large scale. One bottle would cost 1,380 gold coins. 100 bottles would cost 130,000 gold coins, and 1,000 bottles would cost. Their family's purchase was too large. Adding it all up, it wasn't a small amount. Although they could afford it, the patriarch of the Iron Bull family still felt the pinch. Hee, is it expensive? Fatty, who was sitting on a spacious sofa, stretched lazily. He hugged a beautiful girl next to him, his lecherous hand constantly moving up and down her breasts as he slowly said, "Please, this is already a friendly price. If it weren't for the fact that you were introduced by Queen Latte of the Kingdom of Molin, I wouldn't waste my breath on you. Go to the shops outside and take a look. How high are the prices of health potions?" The patriarch of the Iron Bull family naturally knew what Fatty was talking about. The health potions sold in Undercity's potion shops were 2,300 gold coins per bottle. Moreover, there was a demand but no supply. The health potions in the shops were already sold out before they were even put on the shelves. People outside couldn't buy them at all. They could only wait for some people to put them up for speculation. After all, when adventuring, a health potion was equivalent to a life. Many people cherished their own lives very much. Fatty was very arrogant. Facing the Iron Bull family's patriarch who had the strength of a master, he didn't give him any face. The patriarch was fine, but how could the Iron Bull family, who were used to seeing subservient human faces, endure such humiliation? Their faces instantly changed. Bastard. The Iron Bull clan had always been rude and unreasonable. At this moment, one of them finally exploded. He abruptly slammed his hand on the chair, and the powerful force shattered the wooden chair into pieces with a loud noise. Wood shavings flew everywhere, scaring the beautiful girl next to Fatty so much that her face turned pale. Said the Iron Bull family's expert sinisterly. "Brat, since you know we're from the Iron Bull family of the Kingdom of Magical Beasts, you're still so arrogant. You actually dared to offer such a high price. Are you tired of living?" Hearing this, the room quieted down. The Iron Bull family's expert was the patriarch's brother. At this moment, his face was full of anger. He glared fiercely at the weak human in front of him. The patriarch originally wanted to persuade him, but suddenly his eyes rolled. A strange smile appeared on his face, and he retreated to the side to watch the show quietly. Intimidation. Blatant intimidation. 7 or 8 Iron Bull family's experts stood up. They unscrupulously released their powerful strength. A faintly discernible pressure permeated the entire room, bringing great pressure to everyone. The beautiful girl was scared to the point of trembling. Her delicate body constantly burrowed into Fatty's arms. "Hee, don't be afraid, my baby." Faced with the threat of dozens of master-level and master-level experts, the Fatty, who only had the strength of a trainee, remained calm. He smiled and gently patted the beautiful girl's back, comforting her in a soft voice. He didn't care about those experts at all. At this moment, Fatty glared and sneered. "Are you trying to intimidate me? You guys aren't qualified. Pay for this chair first, then talk to me." After saying this, he rolled his eyes and ignored those people. While pretending to comfort the beautiful girl, his hands reached into the girl's clothes. He completely ignored those Iron Bull family's experts. You're courting death." Being completely ignored by the other party, the Iron Bull family's expert exploded in anger. Blue veins popped out on his face. He suddenly roared and pounced at Fatty. As the iron tower-like body approached, a whirlwind appeared in the room for no reason. The Iron Bull clan was terrifyingly powerful. With his strength, killing Fatty was as easy as crushing an ant. "Stop!" A shout came. It was the patriarch who stopped him. The patriarch coldly stared at that person. "We're here to buy something, not to kill." Seeing that Fatty couldn't be intimidated, the patriarch immediately came out to smooth things over. At this moment, the patriarch turned to Fatty and smiled. "Your Excellency's courage is admirable. To be honest, I've never seen a human so calm in the face of such a great disparity in strength." Hee. Fatty laughed disapprovingly. He had seen many storms. If he couldn't see through this little trick, then he wouldn't be the owner of the Calamity Chamber of Commerce. Moreover, he was born with a fierce spirit. Although he was weak, he wasn't afraid of death. "Nothing," Fatty said indifferently. "I only know that if you make a move today, then don't think of leaving Gloom City. As for the deal." Hearing this, the Iron Bull family's leader immediately pricked up his ears. "Let's talk after paying for the chair. Fatty raised his eyebrows, his eyes filled with provocation. The Iron Bull family's leader's face twitched a few times. With great difficulty, he suppressed his anger. "How much do you want for my brother's broken chair?" "Not much, just 5,000 gold coins," Fatty said indifferently. "What? 5,000 gold coins? Why don't you rob us?" The Iron Bull family's expert who broke the chair jumped up and roared. "If you want to buy, then buy. If not, scram." Fatty shrugged and said with a smile, "How about, you don't have to pay for the chair. As for the deal, don't even think about it. Just leave. I won't send you off. Fine. I'll pay." Hearing this, the Iron Bull family's leader gritted his teeth and reluctantly agreed. He valued the long-term cooperation between the two sides, not a short moment of anger. "How many health potions can you provide us?" "That's right. I like to cooperate with people the most." Fatty laughed and stretched out a finger. 1,000 health potions. This is the most we can provide you. If there are no problems, pay up. The Iron Bull family's leader paid the money. Of course, he didn't forget about the broken chair. Then, he took the note that Fatty personally wrote and went to the warehouse to get the potions. "Phew, that scared me to death. I thought he was really going to kill you." After the group of boorish Iron Bulls left, the beautiful girl in Fatty's arms let out a sigh of relief. She playfully stuck out her tongue and said, "If I die, I'll just have to ask Ron to revive me. Then, I'll just have to convert my power into an undead rogue. Haha, that'll be fun." Fatty laughed heartily as he reached out and slapped her plump breasts. "Sir Kid, the young master invites you in." At this time, a maid wearing a black robe appeared outside the room and respectfully said, Ron called me. There must be something. I have to go immediately," Fatty said with a smile. He stood up from the large chair. "When are you coming back?" The beautiful girl's face was filled with confusion. She grabbed Fatty's hand and refused to let go. Chapter 598. Ron lived in a small courtyard in the underworld graveyard of Undercity. In a hall next to the courtyard, Ron was also receiving a special guest. It was a representative from the Orc Empire. The leader was the holy wizard of the Orc Thorny Flower tribe, Miss Morin. At this moment, she was sitting on a thick leather sofa, wearing a gorgeous Orc wizard robe. Her slender legs were crossed, and her posture was indescribably elegant. There were a few Orc warriors standing behind Mullen. They stood there like bodyguards, not moving at all. "Miss, I didn't expect you to come to see me." Ron sat beside her and said with a smile, "Hee, I just established diplomatic relations with the Abia Empire, so I came to visit the Scourge Church on the way." Morin said with a smile. Everyone knew that the Abia Empire was supported by the Scourge Church. With her friendship with Ron, she naturally had to come and visit. Sitting next to Ron was Kadena. At this moment, her beautiful blue hair was tied up high, revealing her snow-white neck. She was wearing a loose long dress that draped down to her ankles. Her smooth, jade-like shoulders were unbearable to look at. At this moment, Kadena was wearing a standard upper-class dress. She was very beautiful. Not only the human men, but even the Orc men were shocked by Kadena's beauty. Death Knight Shea stood behind Ron like an iron tower. Her eyes were tightly closed, as if she was resting. Her elegant white hair, pale face, and strong death aura made her look even more demonic. A powerful warrior of the sacred domain. The Orc warrior behind Mullen came to this conclusion. Immediately, he started to respect this nervous-looking knight. As the princess of the Kingdom of Doro, Kadena naturally knew Miss Morin of the Orc Empire. Although she was not the princess of the Orc Empire, her status was higher than that. She was also representing the Orc Empire to visit Abia. "Greetings, Miss Morin." Kadena lifted her long dress with both hands and slightly bent her right knee, making a standard aristocratic bow. "Princess Kadena is getting more and more beautiful." Morin smiled and returned the bow. She looked at Kadena, who was wearing an upper-class dress, and her face couldn't help but turn gloomy. She then said with a forced smile, "Ron, the Orc Empire didn't give you any explicit support in the war with the Holy See. You won't blame me, right?" "Why would I?" Ron smiled. "I've always been grateful to Miss Morin for the help you gave me in the Orc Empire." Although Ron spoke sincerely, Morin could hear the hidden meaning in his words. He was grateful for her help, but was dissatisfied with her grandfather, the Orc Empire's god of Warly Jia. "I'm sorry," Morin said softly, her face full of apology. I think grandfather had no choice. After all, he had to consider the interests of the Orc Empire. "I understand." Ron nodded. Although he didn't understand why the powerful Orc Empire was so afraid of the Holy See, he still had to say some words. "Thank you for your understanding." Morin took a deep breath. Ron's words relieved the pressure in her heart. At this time, she seemed to have thought of something and smiled mysteriously. "By the way, Ron, I have good news for you." "What is it?" Ron suddenly became curious and asked. "I've received news." Morin looked around and lowered her voice. "A few senators from the Senate may leave the Noah continent in the near future." "What?" Ron's pupils shrank, and then his eyes lit up. He was ecstatic. "Miss, is what you said true?" Ron had reason to be excited. All this time, he had always wanted to lead the Catastrophe Army on an expedition to the north, cross the Rhine River, and directly destroy the Holy See. The signed peace agreement was not a problem at all. It was just a piece of scrap paper. The few experts from the divine realm in the Senate were the real sword hanging over his head. Unless he had the strength of the divine realm, he would not act rashly. If those experts from the divine realm left the Noah continent, then it would be Ron's opportunity. Other than those experts from the divine realm, he was not afraid of anyone. This time, he would not let them go. Ron's eyes revealed a trace of murderous intent. He clenched his fists so tightly that the back of his hands turned white. Previously, the Catastrophe Army had clearly conquered Mount Hygel, but in the end, they were forced to withdraw unconditionally under the coercion of the 7 experts from the divine realm. This made him very unhappy. Kadena sat next to them and felt a little strange. She could not hear what the two were whispering about, and she did not know what Miss Morin said to make Ron lose his composure. However, as Ron's wife and a well-mannered noble lady, she knew not to ask. Even if she wanted to ask, now was not the time. "Is the news true?" Ron took a deep breath and suppressed his excitement. He asked in a low voice, his body trembling slightly. Morin nodded. "I heard it from grandfather. It should be true. The previous mission failed. Now that there's a chance, of course, we have to try again." When Ron had completely calmed down, he closed his eyes as if he was thinking about something, and then asked, "I don't know." Morin shook her head. "I only know that grandfather and the others have already accepted this mission, but they need some time to prepare." Ron nodded. He opened his eyes, and his dark eyes shone brightly. "If it's possible, let me know in advance." "No problem." Morin smiled, as if she had been prepared for this. She agreed to this request. At this time, Fatty walked in along the corridor of the hall and greeted everyone with a smile. Ron stood up with a smile. "Let me introduce you. This is the representative of the Orc Empire, Miss Morin. This is my brother, Gid. I know." Morin smiled. "He's the owner of the Catastrophe Chamber of Commerce. Although I've never met him, I've heard of his name many times. Nice to meet you, Miss Morin." Fatty smiled and bowed, winking at Ron. Every time Ron introduced Fatty to others, he would say that he was his brother. This showed how important Fatty was in Ron's heart. "Young master, you're looking for me?" Fatty glanced at Morin and asked Ron with a smile. "That's right." Ron smiled and nodded. He paused for a moment. "It's like this. Prepare 10,000 bottles of health potions for me. This is a meeting gift for Miss Morin." "What? 10,000 bottles?" Everyone was shocked when they heard this number. Miss Morin gasped. She had indeed come to Undercity to buy some health potions to bring back. Now, there were rumors everywhere that the Scourge Church's health potions were very useful. The original seller of health potions, the Nayan family, had been destroyed. There was no other place to buy them. Miss Morin knew the price of health potions. When her follower asked around in Undercity, she found out that the price of health potions had skyrocketed. 10,000 bottles of health potions was not a small number. Moreover, it was impossible to buy them now, even if you had the money. Giving away 10,000 bottles of health potions so casually was worth tens of millions of gold coins. Even in the Orc Empire, it was a huge fortune. Morin was shocked by Ron's generosity. In this regard, Ron had his own considerations. Compared to the information that Morin had brought to him, 10,000 bottles of health potions were nothing. If Morin could provide him with information about the strong people in the divine realm, he could find a chance to destroy the Holy See. So what if she gave him another 10,000 bottles? No, Ron, this gift is too valuable. I can't accept it. Morin stood up and refused. She paused. But our Orc Empire does need a lot of health potions. How about this? Ron, sell them to me at market price. How about that? Hee miss, you're treating me like an outsider. Ron laughed and pulled Morin back to sit down. With our friendship, can you not mention the word gold coins? Thank you. Morin hesitated for a moment, but still accepted the gift. He actually gave away 10,000 bottles in one go. Hearing all this, Hans could not help but feel a pang of pain. He had just risked his life to bargain with the magical beast for 1,000 bottles of health potions. Now, in the blink of an eye, Ron had given away 10,000 bottles without even batting an eye. Okay, I'll go prepare it right away. Hans nodded and agreed. He was a smart person and knew that some things should not be asked. He only needed to do as he was told. At this time, someone came in to report that the Dean of the Roland Empire's Balarax Academy, Lord Platz, had come to visit. Dean Platz is here? When Ron heard that Dean Platz had arrived, he could not help but be surprised. His eyebrows relaxed, and his face immediately became serious. Quickly, invite him in. Morin also knew that she should leave. She politely said goodbye to Ron. Ron did not ask her to stay and let Kadena send her out. Morin walked to the door of the hall and paused for a moment before turning back. Right, my grandfather asked me to pass on a message to you. Be careful of the Holy See. After saying this, Morin smiled and bowed slightly to bid farewell. Be careful of the Holy See? After Morin left, Ron carefully digested Morin's words and felt that there was a deeper meaning. The message was passed on through the Lord of Strength, but what did it mean? The Holy See clearly did not have much strength left to worry about. Ron could not understand and fell into deep thought. As he was pondering, an old man with a white beard walked in with a smile under the guidance of an attendant from the Scourge Church. Ron, long time no see. Dean Platz, please have a seat. Now that Ron's strength had reached the sacred domain, he had the qualifications to sit on the same level as Dean Platz. He extended his hand and made an inviting gesture as he spoke in a manner that was neither servile nor overbearing. Ron, looks like your strength has increased again. Platz sat down and looked at Ron from head to toe with a smile. His eyes were very sharp. He could see that Ron's strength had increased qualitatively compared to the last war. At this moment, he was like an unsheathed sword, cold and threatening. Dean, you flatter me. Ron smiled and said, Dean Platz. Kadena bowed elegantly. As a former student of the Balarax Academy, she had great respect for Dean Platz. Long time no see, Kadena. Platz smiled and nodded. You and Ron are both the most outstanding students of my academy. The academy is proud of you. Thank you for the compliment, Dean Platz. Kadena had a sweet smile on her face, but her heart was already blooming with joy. Hello, Dean Platz. At this moment, a hoarse voice came from behind Ron. It was Shea. At this moment, she had already opened her eyes and placed one hand on her chest, performing a standard knight salute. You are. Platz's gaze moved from Kadena to Shea's face. When he saw Shea's face, his hand trembled. Chapter 599. What was going on? Wasn't Shea already dead? When Shea was killed that day, Platz was also present and felt sorry for Shea's death. But now, Shea was here, perfectly fine. Apart from some changes in her appearance, she was undoubtedly Shea. This fact shocked Platz. I am Shea, Death Knight Shea. Shea's eyes narrowed slightly as she answered. After Ron's explanation, Platz understood the whole story. He smiled and said, No matter what, Shea, it's great that you're alive. Shea nodded slightly and took a step back. She quietly retreated to the side without saying a word. Ron and Platz exchanged some pleasantries before sitting down. Ron smiled and asked, Dean Platz, you came specially. Is there something you need? There is indeed something I need. Pratt nodded and said sincerely, I won't hide it from you, Ron. I do have something I need your help with. Please speak, Sir Dean. Ron knew that Pratt would not visit him without a reason. It was just that they had helped him a lot. If there was a chance, Ron was willing to repay them. Pratt smiled. It might not be appropriate to call a help. Strictly speaking, it should be called cooperation. He paused and said, Ron, do you know about play missions? Play missions? Ron's heart skipped a beat. Could it be that the divine realm experts of the Senate left the Noah continent to go on a play mission? That's right. Pratt smiled and nodded. But our mission is different from theirs. With our strength, we can't complete the mission of those divine realm experts. What we can do is a mission that can be completed with the strength of the sacred domain. So you want to invite me to complete this mission together? Ron was stunned. Not bad. Pratt nodded and smiled. The mission is in another dimension, and it's quite difficult. We need help. Ron, you're someone we can trust. The key is that you're strong enough to work with us. Hearing Pratt's request, Ron couldn't help but hesitate. Going to another plane to do a mission meant leaving the Noah continent and the Scourge Church. He was a little worried. However, on second thought, the Scourge Church was currently in a safe period. As long as the divine realm powerhouses of the Noah continent's parliament were present, the peace treaty would definitely not be a useless piece of paper. In addition, Pratt and the other three had helped him many times in times of danger. Now that he had asked, Ron couldn't refuse. All right, I can go with you. Ron thought about it again and finally agreed. That's great. Seeing that Ron had agreed, Pratt's eyes lit up. He smiled and said, the reward for this mission is very high. Don't worry, Ron, we won't let you help us for free. After the mission is completed, you'll have a share. Ron smiled. This time, he was going with Pratt to another dimension to carry out the mission purely to help, not for the reward. Of course, he didn't know how shocking the reward for a play mission was. Then it's a deal. Pratt smiled and stood up. In 7 days, we'll meet at the Undercity. We'll set off together then. Happy working together. Happy working together. Ron reached out and high-fived Pratt. This meant that the agreement was reached and there was no going back on it. Carrying out a mission in another dimension was full of difficulties and dangers. Generally speaking, they had to make sufficient preparations. The choice of personnel, equipment, and all sorts of items had to be very formal. They couldn't let a team member go back on their word because of a last-minute matter, and the plan had to be aborted. This was not allowed to happen. In a luxurious room in the Undercity, Kadena and Becerra were busy. They were helping Ron pack up the things for the trip to the other dimension, while Dee Lin had rushed to the Kingdom of Magical Beasts due to an important matter in her family. Seeing the huge pile of things on the floor, Ron didn't know whether to laugh or cry. There were 4 sets of clothes for each of the 4 seasons, 3 sets of gloves, 3 sets of inner armor, and more than 10 pairs of boots. He also brought 2 tents and all sorts of daily necessities and hygiene products. The 3 space bags were filled to the brim. Please, I'm going to the other dimension to complete a mission, not to travel. Can you not put so many useless things? Ron grumbled unhappily. I only need 1 set of clothes to read novels. Other than tents, weapons, and important things, I don't want anything else. How can that be? Kadena smiled and stretched out her hand to point. Of course you have to bring more clothes when you're outside. The other dimension can't be compared to the Noah continent. You don't know where you're going, so it's always good to prepare more. Yeah, I don't know what the weather is like in the other dimension. If it's hot, you can take off your clothes. What if you catch a cold? Becerra interrupted as she folded the clothes. Seeing Kadena and Becerra busy themselves like little wives, Ron was touched. He quietly walked over and suddenly stretched out his hands, one in each hand, and hugged both Kadena and Becerra in his arms. The 2 of them were shocked and were about to struggle. In the next moment, they saw hot lips coming over. Ron hugged the 2 of them and kissed each of them passionately on the face. Kadena and Becerra were hugged by Ron, and their faces flushed red all the way to their necks. Becerra buried her head deep into Kadena's ample chest, not daring to look up for a long time. You're asking for it. Kadena couldn't help but lightly hit Ron. She angrily said, "Who allowed you to kiss me? You're both my wives, and I'm not allowed to kiss you." Ron said with a chuckle. Who? Who said I'm going to marry you?" Kadena said with a red face. Little Sister Basara, I don't know, but this princess didn't agree. Rot's eyes widened. You didn't agree? Don't forget that I snatched you from your wedding in the kingdom of Doro. I don't care what I snatched is mine. Ron smiled with a drooling face, and his hands were restless. They reached into their clothes through their clothes. Basara and Kadena were both wearing thin lace pajamas. Their snow-white, ample bodies were completely exposed, making Ron's nose bleed. You pervert. Kadena was speechless. Her face flushed red as she powerlessly resisted the invasion of Ron's perverted hands. I'm not a pervert. I'm a little beggar, Ron said with a grin. A little beggar being able to marry a noble princess. This experience is enough to write a best-selling novel. As Ron spoke, his hand did not stop. Not long after, both of them were blushing and gasping for breath. In front of Basara, Kadena's expression was unnatural. She, who had received the education of a high noble, was rather reserved. Basara, on the other hand, was lying in Ron's embrace with her eyes closed, allowing Ron's perverted hands to caress her soft waist and land on her ample bosom. For a moment, the room was overflowing with spring. Kadena was reserved while Basara was submissive. The two beauties each had their own flavor, making Ron very happy. Dong, dong, dong. At this moment, a series of hurried knocks on the door broke the lingering feeling in the room. The sudden sound gave the three of them a fright. Kadena jumped up from Ron's embrace. Her face was still red as she tidied up her messy clothes like a thief. Basara did not move. She looked at Ron with a questioning gaze and said, "I'll go open the door." After saying that, she quickly ran to open the door. Shea. The three of them were stunned. As soon as the door opened, Shea's cold face appeared. She glanced at Basara, and her gaze fell on her messy clothes. She frowned and walked in. Shea was wearing a thick white bone armor, revealing her tall and perfect figure. Her heavy body was like steel, making ear-piercing sounds when she stepped on the ground. Sister Shea. Kadena was a little guilty. She hid in a corner like a mistress who had been caught cheating. She called out softly with a red face. Shea lightly nodded her head. Her bewitching red eyes fell on Ron, sizing him up. Ron felt goosebumps from her stare. He forced a smile and asked, "Shea, it's already so late. What's the matter?" At this moment, Shea opened her mouth. "I want to go for the mission in 7 days." This. Ron did not expect Shea to make such a request. He was stunned for a moment. Looking at Ron's expression, Shea frowned and slowly said, "Don't forget, Ron, I'm your guardian knight. My responsibility is to protect your safety. That's why I must go on this mission." Ron wanted to refuse. In his opinion, this trip to the other plane would be quite dangerous. He did not want Shea to take this risk. As a man, he should protect his woman and keep her away from danger. But the woman he loved deeply had become his guardian knight to protect him. All this made Ron feel very ironic. What? I can't? Shea raised her eyebrows and was about to flare up. All right. Seeing that Shea was about to fly into a rage, Ron immediately nodded his head and agreed. 7 days later, I'll bring you with me to the mission in the other plane. Shea's face showed a trace of a smile. Even in the form of a death knight, it could not hide her peerless beauty. On her snow-white face, there was a bewitching taste. Ron could not help but stare blankly at her. In just a moment, Shea's face restrained itself and returned to its original cold expression. She lightly said, "Then it's settled. 7 days later, I'll leave with you." After saying that, she ignored the others and left the room with her heavy body without looking back. The three of them looked at each other, their eyes full of helplessness. After the resurrection, Shea's temperament had changed greatly. Not to mention Ron, even her best friend Kadena felt like a stranger. But she was Shea, the real Shea. Kadena thought for a while, picked up Ron's hand, and put it in her own. She solemnly said, "Ron, I don't care if Sister Shea is your guardian knight or not. But no matter what, you have to take good care of her." Looking at Kadena's serious expression, Ron nodded his head heavily. Chapter 600. 7 days later, in front of the Undercity mercenary base, it was unusually lively. Ron saw Prats, Montego, and Hill in a lounge nearby. The three deans of the Roland Empire were all here. Behind them were three people that Ron didn't recognize. One of them was actually an orc. The lounge had a clean and tidy sofa that was a few meters long. The floor was covered with a thick carpet for VIPs to enjoy. Ron was sitting on the sofa, leisurely sipping a green drink. When he saw Prats and the others enter, he immediately stood up with a smile. "Good morning, Ron." Hill greeted with a smile as soon as he saw Ron. "Dean Prats, Dean Montego, Dean Hill." Ron smiled and bowed slightly. His gaze fell on the faces of the three people behind Prats. He hesitated for a moment before saying, "These three are, haha. Let me introduce you." Prats smiled and introduced them one by one. "This is a priest, Dora, what?" Ron was stunned. His expression froze as he furrowed his brows and asked tentatively, "Holy See?" The priest called Dora was a young woman in her 30s. She wore a pure white robe, and her hair was short and neat. She bowed to Ron and said with a smile, "I'm Priest Dora, but I'm not related to the Holy See." Oh, Ron relaxed after hearing this. Even though he agreed to do a mission with Prats and the others, that didn't mean he would cooperate with the Holy See. If this young woman in front of him was a priest from the Holy See, he would definitely leave in a huff. However, there were many priests in the Noah continent. Not all of them were related to the Holy See, but there were definitely very few priests. Prats laughed. Ron, we don't have a good relationship with the Holy See. We won't invite anyone from the Holy See, so don't worry." He then extended his hand and smiled. "This is the holy sorcerer from the Orc Empire, Moore." Moore was that orc. He was wearing a colorful wizard robe. He was tall, but he had no muscles. He looked like a bamboo pole. Like all male orcs, Moore was extremely ugly. He had a hooked nose, a green face, and fangs. There were all kinds of accessories hanging from his ears, making him look ferocious and ferocious. Holy wizard? Ron's heart skipped a beat. Wasn't this profession the same as Miss Morin's? Could it be that he was also from Miss Morin's family? As if he saw through Ron's thoughts, the holy sorcerer called Morin smiled. "I heard Morin mention you before. She said you're quite strong. You flatter me." Ron smiled and asked, "Could it be that you're also from Miss Morin's family?" "According to seniority, Morin should call me uncle," Moore said with a smile. Ron nodded. His gaze fell on the last young woman. This young woman was quite young. She had a head of fiery red hair and a beautiful face. However, she was as cold as frost. She was like an unsheathed sword. She was very arrogant and ignored Ron. "Mill, the Fire Sword Saint Mill." Prats introduced with a smile. This female sword saint is a sword genius. She has the strength of the sacred domain at the age of 28. Although she doesn't have a domain yet, she is one of the best among the younger generation in the Roland Empire. Mill glanced at Ron and nodded. She said plainly, "You must be Ron. I heard you're also a genius. You have the strength of the sacred domain at the age of 20. If you have time, you must learn from me." Everyone frowned when they heard this. This woman was too insensible. Who would challenge someone as soon as they arrived? Sure. Compared to Mill, Ron was much more cultured. He smiled disapprovingly. "Let me introduce myself. I am Ron, a necromancer. This is Shea, a death knight." After Ron finished his introduction, Prats was stunned. "What? Shea is going too. Is there a problem?" Ron asked curiously. Prats and the others looked at each other, their eyes showing that they were in a difficult position. Mill sneered and said in a high-pitched voice, "Missions in other planes are extremely dangerous. Do you think anyone can go? Without the strength of the sacred domain, you are just going to die. This, Ron, right? Can't you see that we are all sacred domain powerhouses?" Prats's face also became serious. "Ron, I suggest you reconsider. If you're not a sacred domain powerhouse, you will be a burden in the mission. In serious cases, you may even endanger the lives of the team." Montego also said, "Ron, the reason why we are looking for you is because we value your strength in the sacred domain. You should think about it carefully. If you insist, we will disqualify you." Faced with all kinds of accusations from the team, Ron smiled. Dean Prats, Shea is a sacred domain powerhouse. What? Shea is a sacred domain powerhouse? Prats and the others opened their eyes wide in shock. Did I hear wrongly? Didn't Shea just reach the Master Realm? She actually reached the Saint level as well? Mill's gaze froze as she stared at the face that was even younger than her. She coldly said, "She is a sacred domain powerhouse? She looks very young. Ron, you must take responsibility for your words." Pa, Shaya finally couldn't bear it any longer. She took a step forward and instantly released a powerful and cold aura. At the same time, she suddenly pulled out her sword and pointed at Millie, saying with a sneer, "I have endured you for a long time. Why don't we have a match first?" A sacred domain powerhouse? Pratt said in shock. Once the powerful aura was released, it immediately dispelled everyone's doubts. Although she was using soul energy from the aura she released, she was a genuine sacred domain powerhouse. I hate it when people point their swords at me. Put away your sword, or you will regret it. Faced with Shea's threat, Mill's expression turned cold as she spoke. There was a faint flame in her eyes that flickered with a powerful fighting spirit. "Stop, Mill. Stop, Shea." Ron pressed down on her hand and forced Shea's sword down. "Put away your sword, or don't follow me." "Umph." Shea snorted and unwillingly put away her sword. She coldly said, "If it wasn't for Master stopping me today, you wouldn't be standing here alive. You think I'm afraid of you?" Fire Sword Saint Mill sneered and taunted. "All right, stop arguing." Pratz's expression changed as he coldly scolded, "We are all teammates. Don't let this affect our unity." "Oomph." Mill and Shea snorted at the same time and turned their heads away. Ron was delighted. "So, Dean Prats, you agree to let Shea join the team? It's just that with her strength in the sacred domain, of course." Pratt said with a smile. "That's great. Thank you, Dean Prats." Ron said, All right. Prats, your academy is pretty good. It hasn't been long, and another sacred domain powerhouse has appeared. It's as if sacred domain powerhouses can only come from your academy." Hill said, his eyes filled with jealousy. "Hurry up and tell me, what secret technique do you have? How can sacred domain powerhouses rise from your Balarax academy, as if they don't cost anything?" Prats bitterly smiled and shook his head. "How would I know? Although Shea is a student of our academy and has even been a teacher, she's probably only at the master rank. According to my estimates, even if she reached the sacred domain, she shouldn't have reached this stage. Who knows what happened to her that made her strength suddenly increase by leaps and bounds?" "That's right." Monty got nodded in agreement. "A few years ago, I think it was her who led a group of students to cause trouble in our academy. At that time, she was only at the warrior rank. I didn't think that in just a few years, her strength would rise to such a terrifying level. As the dean of the Soaring Dragon Academy, he naturally paid special attention to the outstanding students of the Balarax Academy. It wasn't strange for him to know about Shea. Ron knew that Shea's strength increased after she died and resurrected. At that time, she was only at the master rank. After her resurrection, she rose several ranks and became a sacred domain powerhouse. However, at the same time, her temperament changed greatly. Although she remembered everything from the past, Ron felt that she was a stranger. Even now, Ron didn't know what happened to Shea. Shea stood there quietly, motionless, as if she was a dead person. In fact, she was a dead person. "Hee, Prats, you old geezer. Looks like your academy will have another statue." Hill laughed and winked at Prats. According to the academy's rules, once a student graduated and became a sacred domain powerhouse, the academy would erect a statue in their honor. The purpose was to commemorate this powerhouse. At the same time, they would use him or her as a role model to inspire future students. After Ron became a sacred domain powerhouse, the Balarax Academy erected a statue in his honor. "All right," Pratt chuckled. "The team has been decided. We have 8 people in total. 2 knights, 1 magician, 1 necromancer, 1 thief, 1 priest, 1 shaman, and 1 swordsman. Since this mission is extremely dangerous, we brought along 2 healers. Ron glanced at the priest Dora and the orc's sacred shaman Moore and nodded inwardly. With 2 healers in the team, the mission would naturally be easier. And I, the principal of the Roland Empire's Balarax Academy, will be the team leader of this otherworldly mission. Pratt smiled, then his expression turned serious. I hope everyone will listen to my orders and not act on their own. This is also for everyone's safety. Now let's set off. Pratt said. He led everyone out of the room and arrived at the mercenary base's teleportation circle. Destination: Mercenary Guild Headquarters. Pratt said to the attendant in charge of the teleportation circle and handed over some gold coins. The attendant glanced at Ron and pushed the gold coins back with a smile. Since the young master of the Scourge Church and the powerhouses of the Sacred Domain are using the teleportation circle, we won't charge you. Have a pleasant journey. After saying this, he smiled and activated the teleportation circle. Chapter 601. Walking on the wide streets of the Mercenary Union headquarters, Yin could feel the thick business atmosphere. People came and went on the streets. From time to time, there would be mercenaries wearing uniforms of different professions. They had mercenary badges pinned to their chests, and their eyes were filled with hope as they looked for employers one after another. Among the crowd, Ron also saw many necromancers wearing black robes. Due to the re-establishment of the Scourge Church, the long-lost powerful profession once again shone brightly on the Noah continent. The appearance of necromancers made everyone's eyes light up. Terrifying skeleton summoning spells, mysterious curses, and powerful necromancy magic combined to become one of the most popular professions on the Noah continent. They could do any job in a team, and they were powerful. Therefore, they were welcomed by mercenaries. Necromancers didn't have to worry about a team in the mercenary world. Many large mercenary groups also put up signs for them, looking for necromancers. Of course, other than necromancers, the other professions of the Scourge Church weren't left out either. For example, necromancers who could summon corpses to do battle, death knights who had powerful defensive abilities and evil auras, undead assassins who could appear and disappear like ghosts, necromancers who could heal injuries, and so on. These professions were slightly inferior to necromancers, but their power and mystery made them one of the most popular candidates. These powerful necromancers were all students of the Calamity Academy. Although they weren't very old and weren't very strong, many of them had already displayed their extremely high talent in necromancy magic. Ron stared at these faces that were even younger than him and sighed from the bottom of his heart. He seemed to see seeds growing, taking root, and sprouting. One day, they would all grow into towering trees. At this time, some of them saw Ron, who was following behind a group of Sacred Domain experts. They were stunned for a moment before solemnly bowing. Ron nodded lightly in return. Not long after, Ron and Shea followed Platts and the others to a special place. Hello, we would like to request interplanar teleportation. On the long counter, Platts said to a staff member of the Mercenary Union. Interplanar teleportation. Have you accepted the interplanar mission? The Mercenary Union staff member was a middle-aged man. He was wearing a brown uniform with the Mercenary Union's logo. It was impossible to tell his occupation. Yes, we've already accepted the interdimensional mission, Platt said with a smile. The staff member sized up Pratt's and his group. After seeing that they were all from the Sacred Domain, his expression turned serious. All right then. May I know which plane you're heading to? We're going to. Pratt's paused. The Snow Orchid Continent. Shualon Continent? Ron's heart skipped a beat. This was the first time he had heard the name of this strange continent. Knowing that he was going to a place he had never been to, Ron couldn't help but feel a little nervous. All right, prepare to teleport now. I wish you a pleasant journey. At this time, he walked to the other side and began to control the magic teleportation array. At this time, the teleportation array emitted a strong light. A burst of white light flashed. Ron only felt his vision blur, and then he lost consciousness. The Snow Orchid Continent was a subplane like the Noah continent. However, it was in another parallel space. There were no roads to pass through. The only way was through the plane's spatial channel. Pong! With a sound, Ron only felt his body tremble. Then, he was in an unfamiliar place. It was an unfamiliar room. Behind them was a huge teleportation array. It was exactly the same as the one in the Noah continent. "We're here." Ron was shocked. "Welcome to the Snow Orchid continent." At this time, a pleasant female voice was heard. A tall woman walked over leisurely. "Respected interplanar mercenaries, you've come to a beautiful place." The woman was wearing a tight black suit. Her voluptuous breasts looked like they were bursting out of her clothes. She had a head of long purple hair and pointed ears. She was like an elf. There were no eyeballs in her eyes, making her look very demonic. It was a race that he had never seen before. Ron was stunned. As if she had seen through everyone's thoughts, the woman smiled and introduced herself. "I'm Sophia of the Dark Elf race. I'm also the receptionist of the Snow Orchid Continent's Mercenary Guild. How can I help you?" The Dark Elf race was the legendary Dark Elf race. It was said that in addition to the White Elves, Green Elves, Night Elves, and Blood Elves, there were also the legendary Dark Elves. They cultivated evil powers and were a part of the Fallen Elves. He did not expect to see the legendary Dark Elves in the Snow Orchid Continent. What made Ron even more surprised was that this Dark Elf actually had the strength of an advanced adept. The strength of an advanced adept might not be much in the Noah continent, but a receptionist of the Mercenary Guild actually had the strength of an advanced adept. This was worth pondering. One must know that the staff of the Mercenary Guild in the Noah continent only had the strength of a warrior. The Dark Elf woman sized up Ron and his group. She was surprised by their strength, and her eyes revealed a look of interest. She smiled charmingly and deliberately puffed out her voluptuous breasts. "Respected masters of the sacred domain, Sophia is honored to serve you. How can I help you?" Dark Elf Sophia's body was full of temptation, and she successfully attracted the attention of the adult males in the team. However, this beauty was futile to Platts. He smiled and said, "Thank you, but there's no need for that. All right, masters, this way please." Sophia said resentfully. She extended her hand and gestured for them to follow her. To Sophia, who only had the strength of an adept, it was a rare opportunity to serve the masters of the sacred domain. The benefits were self-evident. Sophia politely sent Platts and his group to the square in front of the Mercenary Guild before bowing and leaving. Standing in the huge square, Ron opened his eyes wide and looked at the scene in front of him in disbelief. The huge building was like a majestic palace. In the huge square, there were dozens of statues of all kinds. Every statue was terrifyingly huge. Compared to himself, Ron felt as if he had entered a kingdom of giants. People. What entered his eyes were densely packed with people. There were millions of them. Ron even suspected that these millions of people were just the tip of the iceberg. Looking around, Ron discovered many races that he had never seen before. Just like the Dark Elves, there were many races that did not exist in the Noah continent. Among these races, there were some that looked like humans, but their faces were obviously not. The aura they emitted was extremely powerful, and some that Ron had never seen before. There were some races that looked like magical beasts. They were tall, covered in scales, and had ferocious faces. It was as if a giant was standing in a crowd. However, there were still humans in the Shu'Alan continent. Ron discovered some, but their numbers were extremely small. "This is the Shu'Alan continent?" Sacred Swordswoman Millie opened her eyes wide in shock as she looked at everything in front of her. As someone who had stepped into another plane for the first time, her eyes were filled with amazement. Ron was not much better. He stared at the crowd in front of him. He felt as if he was a country bumpkin entering a city. He could not get enough of it. "That's right, this is the Shu'Alan continent." Platt smiled and nodded. At this time, he looked at the crowd and put on a serious expression. Although the Shu'Alan continent is a secondary plane like the Noah continent, it is much bigger than the Noah continent. If the Shu'Alan continent is a city, then our Noah continent is like a countryside, Platt said with a self-deprecating laugh. Ron did not laugh. His gaze swept across the unfamiliar races one by one, and his eyes showed a serious expression. None of the people and races here were simple. Their strength was not lower than master rank. Basically, they were all master rank and above. As for the powerhouses of the sacred domain, there were even a few that were as strong as god rank powerhouses. Among them, Ron felt a great pressure. Platts paused for a moment, and his gaze swept across the crowd. I hope that everyone will be more careful when doing missions in the Shu'Alan continent. This place is not like the Noah continent. With our strength, we are considered to be people in the Noah continent. But here, the so-called powerhouses of the sacred domain are just ordinary. Platts said slowly, his tone solemn. When the crowd heard this, their hearts trembled. Even the most arrogant sacred swordswoman, Mill, stopped looking down on Platts. Indeed, in this place where powerhouses were as common as clouds, her so-called sacred domain powerhouse was not that outstanding. At this time, a voice attracted Ron's attention. Come on, take a look. Fresh exotic beast materials, forged armor, boots, and other materials, all for only 5 black crystal coins, selling the sacred tool, Anthem of Ice, for only 50 black crystal coins. Buy it quickly. Selling a large bottle of full recovery potion, freshly concocted. The price is negotiable. In another corner of the Mercenary Union headquarters on the Shu'Alan continent, countless merchants were shouting loudly. In front of them was a cloth that was filled with goods. There were materials from exotic beasts, potions, weapons, armors, and so on. Ron's eyes were dazzled by the sight of it. Don't buy anything here. The things here are more expensive, and only black crystal coins are used for transactions. Platts reminded Ron softly when he picked up an exotic beast essence core. Ron nodded and put down the exotic beast essence core regretfully. This was the essence core of an exotic beast from the sacred domain. In the Noah continent, it was priceless. Chapter 602. Asterisk whoosh, asterisk a long scroll unfurled. Platts held the scroll in his hands, put on his reading glasses, and looked at it carefully. WW. This was a mission scroll. It looked like a map with the location of the mission and the target's location marked on it. Ron curiously moved closer and saw the crisscrossing lines on the scroll. It was a dazzling sight. Ron stared at the map for a long time, but unfortunately, he couldn't understand anything. It's in this direction. Platts raised his head and looked to the east. He narrowed his eyes and pointed into the distance, saying, the location of our mission is about 3,000 kilometers from here. 3,000 kilometers wasn't far, but it wasn't near either. For sacred domain experts who could fly, 2 or 3 days was more than enough time. What's the mission about? Ron asked curiously. The mission is very simple. Platts smiled. There's a place called Moon Lake 3,000 kilometers away. Pick up moonstones. About 30 moonstones can be exchanged for 1 black crystal coin. 30 moonstones can be exchanged for 1 black crystal coin? Everyone smiled when they heard that. Black crystal coins were actually that easy to obtain? Montego's eyes shone. That means if we can pick up thousands or tens of thousands of moonstones, wouldn't we be rich? Of course. Platts put away the scroll with a chuckle. If not for Lord Noah, why would he say that he would give us benefits? Benefits from Lord Noah? Ron stared blankly for a moment before asking. Of course. Do you think that just anyone can accept such a low-risk, high-reward planar mission? Platts smiled. It was only through Lord Noah's recommendation that we were able to accept such a high-reward mission. As long as we collect enough moonstones, we can exchange them for black crystal coins at the Mercenary Union. If the mission goes smoothly, each of us will receive several dozen black crystal coins. The young female priest called Dora said with a chuckle, if that's the case, I'll be able to buy a sacred artifact weapon for priests. Dora had always wanted a sacred level weapon, but now she was only using a dark gold weapon. No matter how good a dark gold weapon was, it couldn't compare to a sacred level weapon. It was no wonder that the experts of the sacred domain would fight over a sacred level weapon. In order to purchase sacred artifacts, Dora had been participating in all sorts of missions. Unfortunately, she never had enough black crystal coins. On the Noah continent, there were simply too few channels to obtain black crystal coins. Only the black market could provide black crystal coins. Unfortunately, black crystal coins were basically unavailable on the black market. Other than the black market, there was another way, which was to accept missions from other planes. However, The dangers of the other planes made many people in the sacred domain shrink back. Many people in the sacred domain even lost their lives while carrying out missions in the other planes. Just as Pratt said, there were still some people in the Noah continent, but in the other planes, they were nothing. Is it really that simple? Ron muttered to himself. He had a vague feeling that something was wrong. In a place like the Shu'Alan continent, where there were so many strong people, the strong people of the sacred domain were too insignificant. In an ordinary hotel room, Ron sat quietly on the bed. Around him, small black dots of light quietly floated, and a thin layer of mist drifted away like the wind. After traveling for 2 days, Ron and the others stayed in a small hotel along the way. Even the strong people of the sacred domain would feel tired after flying for a day. After eating dinner, Ron took the opportunity to rest and began to cultivate. The first time he came to the Shu'Alan continent, Ron was shocked. The Shu'Alan continent was too big and too vast. The Noah continent could not be compared at all. According to Pratt's, even the Shu'Alan continent was nothing. In the universe, there were countless planes, and planes larger than the Shu'Alan continent could be found everywhere. The so-called strong people of the sacred domain were just a speck of dust in the universe. No, they were even less than dust. Ron once thought that the strong people of the sacred domain were already standing at the peak. However, when Ron came to the Shu'Alan continent, a secondary plane that was even more advanced than the Noah continent, he opened his eyes and realized how insignificant his existence was. In the Noah continent, how could he casually meet a strong person of the sacred domain? However, in the past few days in the Shu'Alan continent, Ron had not met many strong people of the sacred domain who were stronger than him. For the first time, Ron felt a sense of urgency. He urgently needed to increase his strength. After circulating his soul force for a long time, it began to gradually dissipate. At this time, Ron slowly opened his eyes and sighed softly. In the past few days, he had been seizing every moment to cultivate. Unfortunately, the results were not great. The increase of his soul force was extremely limited. Until now, he had not broken through to the higher levels of the sacred domain. If Pratt's and the others heard this, they would be so shocked that their eyes would pop out. Above the sacred domain, it was extremely difficult to increase one's strength. Even a genius like Pratt's had been stuck at the lower levels of the sacred domain for dozens of years, and it was difficult for him to make a breakthrough. I'm still too weak. Ron looked at his hand and sighed. At this time, his gaze fell on the ring on his hand, and his heart skipped a beat. The soul ring. This was a ring that had repeatedly created miracles. Until now, Ron had not figured out its origin. This ring seemed to be shrouded in a layer of fog, making it unreal. Ron faintly felt that this ring's origin was extremely great. Until now, he had not been able to use it because his strength was not strong enough to use it. Go in and take a look? A thought suddenly popped up in Ron's mind. Ron took a deep breath and slowly controlled his mind, slowly seeping into the ring. In the vast sea of consciousness, Ron's soul floated. The endless sea water was Ron's soul force. In the sky, a huge whirlpool was constantly rotating. This was the channel that connected his soul and the soul ring. Ron's soul slowly entered the whirlpool. Inside the soul ring, there was a vast space. There were piles of white bones everywhere, giving off a gloomy feeling. After passing through the huge white bone castle, Ron stood in front of the tall nameless pagoda. His eyes emitted a strange light. This nameless pagoda was full of mysteries. Ron remembered that he had once obtained great benefits from this nameless pagoda. At that time, his strength had increased. I wonder if I can use this pagoda to increase my strength? Ron's eyelids twitched. He suddenly had a bold idea. However, Ron had another thought. No, Grandpa Homelin said that every trace of strength must come from one's own diligent study and bitter training. The strength obtained through laziness and trickery is not stable. But Ron looked at the nameless pagoda and hesitated. In his mind, it was as if there were two little people fiercely fighting. One urgently wanted to obtain strength through any means, the other wanted to cultivate diligently. In the end, the thirst for strength prevailed. Ron clenched his teeth and slowly extended his hand. He pressed it on a square stone below the nameless pagoda. The square stone was very smooth. It felt like a bone to the touch. Ron felt a familiar throbbing in his heart. However, he was soon disappointed, because nothing happened. Could it be that this pagoda is malfunctioning? Or is it a warning from the soul ring, telling me not to be too greedy and not to obtain this strength through unearned means? The surroundings were very quiet. Ron could even hear the sound of his own heartbeat. In the end, Ron bitterly smiled and withdrew his hand in disappointment. It seemed that in the end, he still had to cultivate by himself to increase his strength. Just as Ron withdrew his hand, a sudden change occurred. At this time, the nameless pagoda in the soul ring suddenly shone brightly. It began to slowly rotate and issued a caw-caw sound. The entire pagoda seemed to be alive. A light cyan light shone from the pagoda's window and projected outwards. The nameless pagoda was activated. An unending stream of soul force overflowed. It was like a stone mill, slowly rotating. Ron's expression changed greatly. His hand pressed on the nameless pagoda. His body couldn't help but tremble. Cold sweat flowed down his face. The nameless pagoda was activated. Not only was his face not happy, it was filled with fear. This time, not only did the nameless pagoda not release any soul force, it absorbed Ron's soul force instead. How could this be? Why would it absorb my power? Ron was shocked. He desperately tried to withdraw his hand, but he felt that his hand was firmly stuck to the nameless pagoda. He couldn't pull it away at all. Countless soul force passed through Ron's hand and continuously flowed into the nameless pagoda. The nameless pagoda's light became brighter and brighter. The dark green light illuminated the entire sky in the soul ring. In Ron's sea of consciousness, his soul force was greatly depleted. Soon, more than half of it disappeared. His sea of consciousness was drying up. His soul was wailing. Under the absorption of the nameless pagoda, Ron's soul became incomparably thin, as if it was going to disappear at any time. Once the soul was lost, the entire person would become like a walking corpse. Being alive was equivalent to being dead, and being dead was also equivalent to being alive. What should I do? For the first time, Ron felt the fear of death. Before this, he never thought that he would die under the nameless pagoda in the soul ring. This soul ring that had helped him time and time again had now turned into a chain that claimed his life. No, I have to find a way to cut off the connection with it. Otherwise, my soul will be sucked dry by it. In desperation, Ron gritted his teeth. His eyes shone brightly. On the verge of death, Ron made a desperate decision. Soul ignition. In an instant, Ron's eyes turned dark green. After using this ability, his soul force suddenly expanded greatly. Pong! Under the pressure of a large amount of soul force, Ron finally bounced back. His body staggered back a few steps. He looked at the nameless pagoda in front of him in shock. His eyes were filled with intense fear. Ron gasped for breath. Thinking of the terrifying scene just now, he still had lingering fear. He rubbed his aching arm and found that more than half of his soul force had disappeared. I finally got my life back. Although more than half of his soul force had disappeared, Ron still felt lucky. He had almost lost his life just now. Carrying intense fear, Ron didn't turn back and directly left the undead castle. Chapter 603. After who knew how long, Ron slowly regained consciousness. As soon as he opened his eyes, he saw Platts, Montego, and the others looking at him with concern. Thank the heavens, Ron, you're finally awake. Platts faintly smiled and breathed out a long sigh of relief. The surrounding team members also revealed expressions of relief. Ron was startled. He crawled out of bed and shook his dizzy head. What happened to me? You were unconscious for a long time. The priest said with a smile. This morning, we saw you still hadn't woken up, so we went to knock on your door. We knocked for a long time, but no one answered. When we came in to take a look, we discovered you were sleeping like the dead. No matter how hard we tried, you wouldn't wake up. We were all scared to death. What happened to you? Ron inwardly cried out in shame. Indeed, something had gone wrong with his cultivation. Otherwise, he wouldn't have woken up so late. He raised his head and looked at the sky outside the window. It was already noon. Are you all right? Bill asked with a frown. He had a feeling Ron's coma wasn't that simple. Ron smiled apologetically. At this moment, he felt extremely dispirited. No matter what he did, he couldn't raise his spirits. It was as if he had just suffered from a serious illness. Sorry, I had a small problem with my cultivation last night. I'm fine now. Thank you for your hard work. It's good that you're fine. Dora breathed a sigh of relief and faintly smiled. She knew necromancers cultivated the mysterious power of the soul. It was also the easiest for problems to arise. We're fine. The one who had it the hardest was Shea. When she saw you like this, she was so worried she almost cried. She was so busy helping you that she didn't even stop for a moment. Shea? Ron was stunned. Shea actually cared about him? Nyeyan's heart trembled. He gazed at Shea, hoping to catch a glimpse of Shea's long-lost expression of concern. Unfortunately, Ron was quickly disappointed. Shea's expression was still as cold as ever. Her crimson eyes didn't contain the slightest trace of emotion. Since you're fine, then get up. Why are you still lazing around in bed? Do you want me to sympathize with you? Shea glanced at Ron, and her face sank. She coldly threw down these words, and with a flick of her snow-white long hair, she ignored Ron and walked out of the door with heavy footsteps. Then, with a bang, she slammed the door shut. Except for Ron, everyone was in a trance. Was the cold guy really the girl who was crying just now? This corpse is really rude. It's simply detestable. The female swordsman, Millie, frowned and snorted coldly, her tone carrying dissatisfaction. Forget it, I'm fine anyway. Ron didn't mind Shea's rudeness. Although the resurrected Shea still had the memories of the previous Shea, her temperament had changed greatly due to the contamination of her soul. Ron was already used to her cold attitude. Since he was fine, he got up and continued on his way. When Ron arrived at the hotel, he found that Shea was already waiting downstairs. She was leaning against a tree. Seeing Ron come down, she nodded faintly and said, "Let's go." Ron nodded. Not long after, the golden wyvern and the abyss skeletal dragon roared and flew into the air. The two wyverns were creatures of the sky. Riding on them was much faster than flying. For people sat on each wyvern's back as they flew towards the east. Ron sat on the abyss skeletal dragon's back. Pratt, Dora, and Millie sat with him as the wind whistled past their ears. Pratt saw that Ron was a little distracted and hurriedly asked with concern, "Ron, are you okay? Do you want to rest for a while?" Ron forced a smile and said, "I'm fine." After flying for a while, Pratt called out, "We're here." The two wyverns disappeared in the air with a swoosh, and the 8 of them slowly descended. Stormwind Forest was a dangerous place in the Shuelon continent. There were deep cliffs everywhere, as sharp as blades. Below them was a huge forest. The huge trees in the forest stunned everyone. Every tree was as big as a small mountain. The smallest tree was as thick as 500 people hugging it. Walking into the forest was like walking into a small ant. On the outskirts of Stormwind Forest, there was a circle of mercenaries. They gathered in groups of 3 to 5 and shouted loudly. This place in the wilderness was like a market. Come, 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 take a look. Moonstones for sale. The price is cheap. You can buy them quickly, elite thief looking for a team. Master thief with top-notch scouting skills. Strong battle power. This team only needs a healer. Healer, come quickly. Destination, Moon Lake. The team is about to depart. This is Moon Lake. Ron was stunned. This is not Moon Lake. This is a place called Stormwind Forest. It's still very far from Moon Lake. Pratt answered. Seeing that Ron did not quite understand, he smiled and explained. Moon Lake is the central area of Stormwind Forest. If we want to go to Moon Lake, we have to enter Stormwind Forest. According to the information I heard from the Mercenary Union, this is the border of Stormwind Forest. It's the closest place to Moon Lake. We'll rest here for a while. We'll go in soon. Monty got said with a smile. Oh, Ron suddenly understood and nodded. Monty got walked to a large rock and sat down. He took out a large bottle from the space bag at his waist and gulped it down. After rushing for half a day, he was very thirsty. Some of the team members took out dry rations and bread, including the beautiful young woman Dora and the female swordsman Millie. They picked up the bread and started eating without caring about their image. There was no trace of their usual reserved manner. As a veteran mercenary, it was quite boring and unnecessary to maintain one's image when adventuring and carrying out missions. Shaya didn't eat anything. She was a corpse, so there was no need to eat. Ron also didn't feel hungry. He sized up the surrounding mercenaries with interest. These mercenaries belonged to different races, and their appearances were also different. "Excuse me, are you guys going to enter the Moon Lake?" Just as everyone was sitting on the rock to rest, a voice sounded. Ron looked back and saw two humans. They were a man and a woman. One was wearing a magician's costume, while the other was wearing a warrior's costume. The man was handsome, and the woman was beautiful. From their appearance, they seemed to be brother and sister. They asked politely, their eyes constantly looking up and down at everyone, their eyes full of hope. "What's the matter?" the female swordsman Millie asked. In the snow-orchid continent, the existence of humans was very rare, which aroused her interest. When the man saw that someone was paying attention to him, his eyes lit up. He bowed deeply to Millie and revealed a handsome smile. "Sorry to disturb you guys. If you want to enter the Moon Lake and need manpower, you can consider us brother and sister. One of us is a warrior, and the other is a magician. If we join the team, we'll be of use. Hee, I see." Millie gave him a friendly smile. She suddenly had a good impression of this polite human male. She paused for a moment. "Of course, no." Just as Millie was about to agree, Pratt interrupted her coldly. He stood up, looked at the two of them, and said coldly, "I'm sorry, we don't plan to add anyone to our team. Please leave." When the man and woman heard this, their eyes were filled with disappointment. The male human warrior forced a smile. "Sorry to disturb you." With that, he pulled his sister and left. Looking at the two of them leaving in disappointment, Ron's heart was filled with sympathy. "Millie, you don't have the right to decide who to join us. I hope you understand who's the leader." Platz glared at Millie and said coldly, "Also, the two of them just now only have the strength of a master. If they join our team, they'll only drag us down." "Got it." At this moment, Millie's face was flushed red. Surprisingly, she didn't refute Pratz's words. She had developed a slight liking for this man from another plane. She didn't notice his strength and almost did something irrational. "I hope you'll be more careful in the future." Seeing Millie apologize, Platz's face looked better. He continued, "It's not that we can't add more people to our team, but the people who join us can't drag us down. The two of them just now were obviously here to take advantage of the situation. With their strength of a master, they want to be in the same team as us? Oof, are they even worthy?" In a place like the Shu'alan continent, where powerful races ran rampant, the presence of humans was relatively weak. Because of this, when the two of them saw that there were 7 humans in the team, they came forward with drooling faces. At that moment, Ron understood a principle. In this other plane that was full of danger and temptation, one must always keep a clear head. When it was time to harden one's heart, one must harden one's heart. Although Ron sympathized with them, he also understood that letting the two of them join the team would only be a burden. Platz's decision to reject them was very wise. Forget it, don't blame Millie. She didn't do it on purpose. It's her first time on a mission in another plane. She doesn't know anything. Hill smiled and said to smooth things over. He looked at everyone around him and said, "Have you all rested? If so, let's go." When Ron, Montego, and the rest heard this, they all stood up and packed their things to prepare to leave. At that moment, a loud voice was heard. "Hello, may I ask if you need a team member?" Someone asked to join again. When everyone heard this, they turned their heads to look, but they didn't see anyone. "May I ask if you need a team member?" At that moment, the loud voice was heard again. Following the source of the voice, Ron finally found the people who spoke. They were 2 extremely short human men. They were shorter than even the shortest human and were about the same height as a child. Chapter 604. a race that he had never seen before. Ron carefully sized up the two races that looked similar to humans in front of him. One of them was wearing heavy armor, holding a large axe that was shining with red light in his left and right hand, and a huge hammer that was shining with blue light in his other hand. He wore an iron helmet and had a long beard. He looked very heroic. On the other one wore a strange blue hat and leather armor. He held a long thing in his hand that emitted a white light. Ron could not tell what it was. He also had a long white beard and looked very old. Everyone looked at the two small humans as if they were looking at monsters. They did not speak for a long time. Now was the two people's turn to be confused. They looked at each other, and one of them could not help but ask, "Why are they staring at us? Are there flowers on our faces? They're not idiots, are they?" Another one asked. He looked at Platts and the other suspiciously. Cough. Platts came back to his senses and coughed awkwardly. You're here to join the team?" The man in the iron helmet heard and rolled his eyes. He said gruffly, "Of course, if it wasn't for the fact that your team is strong, with a human priest and an orc wizard, who would waste time on you? If you have time, you might as well drink." "Look, this." Platts coughed slightly to hide his awkwardness. He asked, "May I know which race you two are from?" When the two short humans heard this, they immediately widened their bean-sized eyes. The guy in the iron helmet was so angry that his beard trembled. He clumsily waved his hand and roared, "What? You don't even know the great dwarves?" Dwarves? Ron and the others were stunned. They knew that the two people in front of them were not humans at all, but the legendary dwarves. Although they were nominally a branch of humans, in fact, the dwarves had little to do with humans. Some dwarves even hated humans very much. Dwarves were loyal and honest, but they were often deceived by insidious and cunning humans. Over time, humans became synonymous with distrust in the eyes of the dwarves. If it weren't for the two dwarves seeing that their team was strong and that they had a priest and wizard, they wouldn't have come to their door. There was a fundamental difference between dwarves and humans. First of all, the height of an adult dwarf was about half of a human's height. Second, every dwarf liked to grow a big beard. Dwarves with beards were the symbol of power. Although they were not tall, they were definitely strong. Many dwarves had another talent, which was blacksmithing. They could forge weapons and armor. Due to their strength, the equipment they forged was definitely of the highest quality. Some dwarves could even forge holy equipment. Another hobby of dwarves was that they loved to drink. Many dwarves spent 80% of their income on alcohol. They drank until they were drunk every day. When they sobered up, they would go on missions or forge equipment. Platts bowed slightly and said, "Sorry, we are humans from another dimension. We don't have your race there, so we were blind. Please forgive us if we have offended you." "Oh, so you are humans from another dimension." When the two dwarves heard this, their expressions softened. In the snow orchid continent, there were not many dwarves. It was normal that there were no dwarves in other dimensions. A continent without dwarves would be a lot less fun. Another dwarf, who was holding a long iron weapon, whispered softly. The dwarf in the helmet slammed his axe on the ground and said impatiently, "Be straightforward. Just say if you want to join us or not. If you don't, we'll go find someone else." The dwarf wearing the helmet was a little impatient, while the other dwarf was slow and unhurried. "Yes, of course." Platts's expression did not change, but his heart was blooming with joy. With such powerful dwarves joining them, he could not wait. Besides, they were all races from the snow orchid continent, so they should be more familiar with this place. Seeing that there was a team that wanted to join them, the two dwarves finally smiled. "Let me introduce myself. I am Shanshio." The dwarf in the helmet pointed at himself with the tip of his axe, then at the other dwarf. "This is Spark, my younger brother. We came to the Stormwind Forest to complete the Moonstone mission. We can set off at any time. Both of us brothers are from the Sacred Domain. Don't worry, we won't drag you down," Spark said. Shanshio spoke very straightforwardly, without any hesitation. Spark, on the other hand, was more steady. "Sacred Domain?" Ron's eyes widened, and his face was full of surprise. He did not think that the two comical and unprepossessing fellows in front of him were actually from the Sacred Domain. However, The aura that they exuded vaguely confirmed his guess. It seemed that Dean Platts had also noticed this, and that was why he wanted to join them. In that case, we are teammates with the same goal, Platts said. He smiled and extended his hand. Everyone must work together. Shanxio understood and extended his hand as well. However, the difference in height between him and Platts was quite large, and it looked very comical. Happy cooperation. Happy cooperation. The two high-fived, indicating that they had reached an agreement. Platts hurriedly introduced all his teammates. When he introduced Ron, the two dwarves were only slightly surprised for a moment before their expressions returned to normal. Let's go. Montegot said. He could not wait any longer. Let's go. As the team leader, Platts nodded and looked behind him. Right, I forgot to ask, what are your professions? Shanxio said, I'm a dwarf warrior. I'm good at close combat. Spark said, I'm a dwarf musketeer. I'm good at long-range attacks. Only then did Ron see that the dwarf called Spark was holding a double-barreled musket. Moreover, Ron also noticed that the two dwarves were holding sacred weapons. It must be known that in the Noah continent, not every expert in the sacred domain had a sacred weapon. When did sacred weapons become so worthless? I wonder how powerful this musket is? Ron thought to himself. A group of 10 mercenaries walked into Stormwind Forest. Looking at Stormwind Forest from the outside wasn't as shocking as looking at it from inside. Huge towering trees covered the sky and made people look like ants. There was a small path when they first entered the forest, but after walking for about 20 minutes, the path disappeared. Leaves that were several meters thick could be seen everywhere. When they stepped in, half of their bodies would sink into the ground. Don't fly in the sky above Stormwind Forest. The chaotic wind in the sky carries a powerful force. If you're not careful, you'll be torn to pieces. We can only walk in slowly. After knowing that Platts was a human from another plane, the dwarf Shanxio said as he walked in front. At this moment, half of his body was buried in the leaves, and only his head was sticking out. It was as if he was swimming, and it looked very funny. Ron's heart skipped a beat. Sir, you seem to be very familiar with this place. We've been here a few times, so we can be considered familiar with it. Shanxio smiled honestly. Every time the two brothers ran out of money to buy wine, they would come here to have a drink. They would take some moonstones and exchange them for money to buy wine. These two guys were from a race that would die if they did not drink for a day. There are many exotic beasts here, and most of them have the strength of the sacred domain. Shanxio enthusiastically introduced. Exotic beasts from the sacred domain? This time, it was Ron and the others' turn to be surprised. There were only a few exotic beasts from the sacred domain in the entire Noah continent. However, in the Shualan continent, there were so many exotic beasts from the sacred domain in a small place like Stormwind Forest. They could not help but be cautious. But you guys can rest assured. Although there are many exotic beasts from the sacred domain, there are no exotic beasts from the divine domain. As long as we are careful, reaching Moon Lake will not be a problem, Shanxio said with a smile. You guys have made the right choice by teaming up with me. We brothers have been here a few times, and we know which route has fewer exotic beasts. The journey was pleasant. Perhaps the dwarf brothers had chosen a good route, as they did not encounter a single exotic beast along the way. Even Shanxio's team was quite lucky. Among the two dwarves, Shanxio, as the elder brother, was very talkative, while the younger brother, Spark, was like a taciturn gourd. The group of 10 talked as they walked. Soon, they walked out of the pine forest and came to an open area. Everyone was relieved when they stepped on solid ground. At least they did not have to travel as if they were swimming. When they looked up at the sky, they saw that it was already dark. Let's set up camp here today, Shanxio said. He glanced at Platts, the captain, and asked for his opinion. Platts nodded. Let's all rest here. After getting the captain's permission, everyone put down their things and began to get busy. Some of them prepared food, started a fire, cooked dinner, and set up tents. The two new dwarves did not stay idle either. They came to help with a smile. Don't start a fire. Just as Sacred Swordswoman Millie made the fire rise with great difficulty, the dwarf musketeer, Spark, screamed loudly. He ran over quickly like a rabbit and put out the fire with a few stomps. Sacred Swordswoman Millie was stunned. "What's wrong?" Platz walked over and asked. "Don't start a fire in the wild. This is common sense. The light of the fire and the smell of food will attract the exotic beasts within 100 miles. Do you want us all to become snacks for the exotic beasts?" Spark said coldly. There were fewer exotic beasts in the Noah continent, so it was not a problem to start a fire in the wild. In addition, Platz and the others were strong warriors of the sacred domain. They were used to being arrogant in the Noah continent. Even if the exotic beasts of the sacred domain came to the Noah continent, they were not afraid. They could kill one or two of them directly. No matter how strong the exotic beasts were, they would not be able to fight against 10 strong warriors of the sacred domain. However, in the Shu'Alan continent, exotic beasts were counted as herds. Startling a herd of exotic beasts was an act of suicide. No matter how strong a sacred domain warrior was, he could not compare to the terrifying number of exotic beasts. In addition, among the exotic beasts, there were sacred domain warriors. Even a strong warrior of the sacred domain would not be able to escape unscathed. After listening to Spark's explanation, everyone came to a realization. Since they could not start a fire, they could only eat dry food. Platz and the others were all people who cared about the big picture, so they did not complain. However, without meat at night, it felt like something was missing. After a simple dinner, Platz looked at everyone and said in a deep voice, "We need someone to guard the camp at night. Who will do it?" "I'll do it," Ron volunteered. As a necromancer who walked in the dark, even if it was a dark night, nothing could escape his eyes. Platz blinked and said with a smile, "All right, Ron, do you need it?" At this time, a voice suddenly sounded in the dark, interrupting Platz. It was the orc race's holy sorcerer Moore. He was sitting quietly at the side, smoking a pipe. He used a black cloth to cover the flame on the end of the cigarette. When he saw everyone looking at him, he blew out a long puff of smoke and smiled. "We don't need anyone to guard the camp. This thing can be used as a substitute." Moer stretched out both of his hands. Streaks of lightning circled around his hands. After a while, a root-like object appeared in Moer's palm. Moer stuck it into the ground. The stick flickered slightly, appearing and disappearing in the dark night. "This is the scout guard I summoned," the orc great sorcerer Moore said with a smile. "I only need to place enough scout guards around the camp, and they can completely replace people on guard duty. If there's any danger, they will automatically alert us." "Amazing!" Ron exclaimed inwardly. Seeing this, he couldn't help but admire Moore. Every class had their own advantages. Moore was able to defeat Ron with this move alone. "Not bad." Platz smiled with satisfaction. "Very good. Moore, I'll leave the safety of the camp to you. Ron, you've been on the road for the whole day. Rest well." Everyone went to rest. In the dark forest, 10 tents were neatly arranged together, their backs against the mountain rocks, forming a semicircle. The warriors were on the outside, and the mages were on the inside. Everyone took out their weapons from their space bags and placed them beside their pillows, ready to deal with any unexpected situations. A cold wind blew in the silent night. There were only dozens of rod-like scout guards guarding the key points like guards. The tips of the rods were constantly spinning, scanning the surroundings like radars, appearing and disappearing in the darkness. Platz had naturally taken sufficient safety measures when he came to a different plane for a mission. However, in the middle of the night, something still happened. "Awoo!" A miserable voice sounded out, and it sounded like a sobbing complaint, breaking the silence of the night. Chapter 605. Something's wrong. Ron was the first to wake up. He was the first to wake up. He suddenly touched the side of his pillow and firmly held the dragonbone staff in his hand. With a pull of the tent, his body turned into a cloud of smoke and fled out the door. "What's wrong? What's going on?" Everyone in Platz's mercenary team woke up and walked out of the tent. Their faces were full of shock. "It's a shadow wolves." The dwarf warrior, Hill, had a grave expression on his face. The sounds that came from the dark night were the cries of shadow wolves. They were creatures that lived in the dark. During the day, they hid in caves and slept, but at night, they were very active. They usually lived in groups, and in Stormwind Forest, they were the nightmare of mercenaries. No, it's the Shadow Wolves. The dwarf musketeer Spark's face changed. The wolf is calling for his companions. The orc's sacred wizard Moore also said in a deep voice, "That's right. I also noticed many beasts approaching quickly. Whoosh, 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 whoosh." A few sounds flashed by, as if something suddenly came out. Ron took a closer look and sucked in a breath of cold air. About 10 meters away from him, a few black shadows appeared on the small mountain peak in front of him. They were wolves the size of calves. Their fur was all black, and there was no reflection under the bright moon. The shadow wolves kept roaring, revealing a row of white teeth. The saliva that kept dripping down sparkled in the darkness. Hill's face changed. "They're here. Pack up and get ready to retreat. Pack up immediately." Platts didn't dare to delay. He immediately ordered everyone to pack up their simple tents and stuff them back into their portal bags. A woo! The mournful sound rang out again. A gust of wind blew in the calm Stormwind Forest, making the leaves rustle. More and more green eyes lit up, appearing abnormally demonic in the darkness. There are more than 30 of them. Luckily, these shadow wolves only have the strength of a master, Ron thought. At this time, his expression began to relax. They were just master-level beasts. Their team was full of sacred domain powerhouses. What was there to be afraid of? Not only Ron, but Platts and the others also relaxed after seeing the strength of the shadow wolves. Some began to blame the dwarves for making a big fuss. Unlike the others, the nervous look on Shan Chio's face never changed. "Prepare for battle," Platts shouted. A pillar of fire flew out from his hand and attacked the closest shadow wolf. Facing the burning pillar of fire, the shadow wolf let out a strange cry and rolled to the side, dodging the pillar of fire. At the same time, it roared and disappeared on the spot. What? Ron was shocked. He couldn't believe his eyes. The shadow wolf had disappeared in front of everyone's eyes. It's a thief's stealth. Hill, known as the King of Assassins, immediately saw through the shadow wolf stealth. He cried out in alarm. "Careful, they're coming." Roar. A shadow wolf suddenly appeared above the team. It let out a furious roar, raised its sharp claws, and fiercely pounced down. It can fly. Ron was dumbstruck. Not only was this shadow wolf extremely fast, it also had the ability to fly. The target of the shadow wolf pouncing down was none other than Holy Priest Dora. Dora was busy casting all kinds of blessings on her teammates. She had no idea a shadow wolf would suddenly appear above her. At this moment, even if she wanted to dodge, it was already too late. Her beautiful face turned pale with fright. Careful! Ron's heart tightened. He quickly condensed the bone spear in his hand. Unfortunately, due to the distance, he was still a step too late. Bang! At this moment, a crisp sound rang out. The shadow wolf that ambushed them suddenly trembled, as if something had exploded. A large amount of blood blossomed from its body. It let out a miserable howl and collapsed to the ground. It curled up a few times, then stopped moving. At this moment, Spark was raising the double-barreled shotgun in his hands. Faint cyan smoke was still rising from the pitch-black muzzle. So fast, Ron was overwhelmed with shock. He couldn't see the bullet's trajectory clearly. He only saw a flash of flame before the attack arrived. Musketeers really are amazing, Ron inwardly exclaimed. He instantly felt a sense of respect for this class. He wondered how many shots he could block if Spark were an enemy. A large hole was blasted open in the stomach of the shadow wolf. Its intestines and innards were blown to pieces. It didn't look like it would live for much longer. Gotcha! After Spark fired, he calmly removed the shell. Then, he took out a new bullet from who knows where and loaded it. Hill roughly brandished the axe and hammer in his hands and loudly shouted, "Retreat immediately. Pay attention to the mages." Roar! After one shadow wolf was killed, the pack of shadow wolves seemed to be enraged. As soon as Hill's voice fell, the pack of shadow wolves moved. They growled and charged toward Pratz's team. Dozens of shadow wolves moved at the same time, and dozens of black shadows scurried through the forest. Pratz's team began to move. Pratz condensed a fireball. Ron summoned the skeleton warriors and skeleton mages, and Shea summoned the nightmare beasts. Everyone fought against the pack of shadow wolves. Unexpectedly, the shadow wolves that were only at the master level were not afraid of the Sanctuary Realm powerhouses at all. They fearlessly charged forward without fear of death. These shadow wolves were extremely fast. Their talents were stealth and invisibility. They appeared and disappeared unpredictably, and their attacks were silent. They were the nightmare of all mercenaries in the dark. In Stormwind Forest, many powerful mercenaries, and even those from the Sacred Domain, had their throats slit in the dark. More and more shadow wolves appeared. From the beginning, there were only 20 of them. Now, there were hundreds of them. Shadowless shadow wolves appeared on the treetops and rocks. They were like shrewd assassins, quietly lying in wait for an opportunity to ambush. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Countless black shadows scurried through the forest. It was dazzling. The pitch-black shadows flickered in and out of the forest, and it was impossible to guard against them. The battle dwarf, Hill, stood in front of the team. He was like a meat shield, swinging his axe and hammer that were larger than his body. Every time he swung his axe, a shadow wolf would be killed or injured. Strong physique created brave dwarfs. Facing the siege of dozens of shadow wolves, there was no fear on Hill's face. Shaya was also fighting. Her silver-white long hair fluttered in the air. She coldly snorted and brandished her sword, streaking across the void. With a blood-curdling cry, blood splattered in all directions. The shadow wolf's figure slowly appeared in the empty air. The injured shadow wolf didn't expect that Shaya would actually see through its figure. Its pair of ice-cold eyes ruthlessly stared at her, emitting a fierce glint in its eyes. "It's a pity," Shaya said indifferently. "Your attack won't have much effect on me, but my counterattack will be fatal to you." After saying that, she did not care whether the shadow wolf understood or not. She swung her sword, and the shadow wolf's head was separated from its body. After killing another shadow wolf, Shaya couldn't be happy no matter what. Her armor had been torn apart by the shadow wolf's claw, and a shocking wound had appeared on her shoulder. It was so deep that her bones could be seen. That shadow wolf's sneak attack had injured her, but her injuries were slowly recovering under the effect of the evil aura. The situation is not good. Shaya frowned. She did not expect that a team made up entirely of powerhouses from the Sacred Domain would suffer such a great loss under the attack of a pack of shadow wolves. The seemingly chaotic pack of shadow wolves cooperated with each other when attacking. Some were responsible for attracting the opponent's attention, some were responsible for attacking, and some were responsible for sneak attacks. They worked together as if they were hunting for food. As if they had a purpose, these shadow wolves began to separate the powerhouses from the Sacred Domain. They focused their attacks on the mages and focused on restraining the warriors. Even Shea, a Death Knight, could not avoid being injured, let alone the mages. The shadow wolves were the nemesis of mages. Platz, Dora, Moore, and the others were surrounded by the shadow wolves. They were flustered for a moment and were all injured. Although Ron was also a mage, he could only protect himself. He summoned a large number of undead creatures and surrounded himself tightly. However, the human wave tactic was useless here. The female swordsman roared again and again. She waved the red sword in her hand, and dozens of shadow wolves could not get close to her. Compared to the mages, the warriors were not at a disadvantage. Dora and Moore kept casting healing spells. If they were even a little slower, some of their teammates would have died. Everyone was shocked. These arrogant Sacred Domain powerhouses had never thought that they would be beaten so badly by a group of master-level exotic beasts. The exotic beasts from another plane were actually this strong. Roar! At this moment, a sound came from somewhere. The shadow wolves suddenly changed. Their bodies changed and split into two. In an instant, their numbers doubled. Hill was shocked. "Oh no, it's a shadow clone. Everyone, be careful." The shadow wolves behind the shadow clone increased in number. The shadow clones and the real bodies intertwined, and it became more difficult to deal with them. The chaotic attacks were dazzling. Dwarf Hill roared. He jumped up high and smashed the giant hammer in his hand on the ground. Heavy strike. Boom. Only a burst of bright light could be seen, and in the midst of an intense rumbling sound, a force suddenly spread out. The dozens of shadow wolves around him were enveloped by this force, and like broken kites, they were sent flying and heavily fell to the ground, motionless. They were actually killed in an instant. "Quick, retreat now," Dwarfil bellowed. Needless to say, everyone wanted to retreat at this moment. These exotic beasts were too strong. Their team of Sacred Domain powerhouses could not fight back at all in front of the organized shadow wolves. Retreat. Chapter 606. After resting for 2 days, I'm finally back. Sorry, dear readers. The dark night and the forest provided shelter for the shadow wolves. In this so-called home ground, Pratt's was the saint. However, Monty got, Shea, and Dwarf Hill led the way while Pratt's and Ron held the fort. The Sacred Domain team slowly retreated. However, the shadow wolves were still chasing after them. Hundreds of thousands of shadow wolves turned into black shadows and attacked Pratt's team. The attacks of the shadow wolves gradually slowed down, and the Sacred Domain team took the opportunity to gather together and began to counterattack effectively. The shadow wolves could not gain any advantage. "Heal! We need to heal!" The dwarf, Spark, waved his short arms and shouted. "Are the priests and wizards of the team all dead?" Beside the dwarf stood a huge exotic beast. It was an earthen mauler. This earthen mauler was a summoned beast and one of the only means of self-defense he had as a musketeer. If it weren't for this earthen mauler, he would have been torn to shreds by the pack of shadow wolves. The earth mauler was a hunting beast summoned by the musketeer. It had the strength of the Sacred Domain and fought with powerful earth magic and powerful physical abilities. Its attack power was extremely terrifying. At this moment, there were already corpses of shadow wolves around it. They were either injured by the earth thorns or killed by the earth mauler's paw. Even so, Spark was slightly injured. Traces of blood stained his battle robe. The earth mauler could not completely protect him. At this moment, he needed to be healed. Pratt frowned and said with some dissatisfaction, "Moore, what's wrong with you? Your teammate is injured and you don't care? Don't forget your duty." Moore hurriedly said, "Coming. Isn't Dora a priest too? Why isn't she healing?" Moore muttered in his heart. At this moment, he was extremely depressed. It was not that he did not want to use healing methods, but these shadow wolves seemed to know that he was a healer and was the team's weakness. They kept attacking him. If it were not for Monty Got protecting him, he would have died many times over. Heal the guards. Moer knew that he was in a critical position. If he was not careful, the whole team would be wiped out. At this moment, he did not dare to shirk his responsibility. He immediately released a healing guard to heal everyone's injuries. Like the scouting guard, the healing guard was also a stick. It was summoned by Moer and inserted deep into the soil. The top of the stick was constantly rotating, emitting a faint yellow light. Under the light, everyone's injuries were slowly recovering. Only then did everyone breathe a sigh of relief. At this time, the shadow wolves also stopped attacking. They crouched on the hills, trees, and rocks. Their bodies seemed to be invisible, appearing and disappearing in the darkness. Only a pair of green eyes could be seen, coldly staring at the people below. Facing the masters of the Sacred Domain, there was no trace of fear in their eyes. Now that they were being stared at by thousands of pairs of eyes, everyone felt a chill from the bottom of their hearts. "Damn it, these damned bastards." Female Sword Saint Millie cursed fiercely. She was ambushed by the shadow wolves and suffered some injuries. Although her injuries were almost healed, she was not convinced. Being injured by a few shadow wolves that were only at the master level was the greatest humiliation of her life. "Captain Pratt, I want to kill them all," Millie said. Her eyes were filled with a strong desire to fight. On the long sword in her hand, there was a faint flicker of fire. "No." Dwarf Hill rejected the female Sword Saint suggestion. He narrowed his eyes and said, "They have an overwhelming advantage in numbers, and we don't know how many shadow wolves are coming. The environment is also not good for us." Then he turned to Pratt and said seriously, "Captain, I suggest we retreat." Pratt quietly looked at the shadow wolves in the darkness. After thinking for a while, he asked, "They won't chase after us, right?" as long as their king doesn't come. Even if they chase after us, it won't be a problem. Dwarf Hill replied. When he said king, his tone was very serious. Hmm? At this moment, Ron's heart suddenly tightened. A dangerous aura instantly attacked his heart. At this moment, there was a sudden change. There was a swoosh, like the sound of sharp blade. Everyone was shocked. Before they could react, Holy Wizard Moore let out a muffled groan and fell to the ground. The healing guard lost the support of its power and instantly dimmed. Be careful, there's a sneak attack. Everyone shouted angrily. Ron also reacted quickly. When he looked around, other than Great Wizard Moore, who had fallen to the ground, there was only darkness. There was no trace of the sneak attack. What? There's no trace? He fell down. He saw Great Wizard Moore fall to the ground with his own eyes, but he didn't find anything strange. It wasn't that there was no trace, but that the enemy came too quickly. At this moment, Ron was nervous. His palms were sweating as he gripped the Dragonbone staff. It had been a long time since he had felt such a dangerous aura. He felt as if he had been targeted by some wild beast, and his hair stood on end. It's here. Shaya's eyes were sharp. Through the red eyes, she saw a faint black shadow. That shadow was moving quickly. Disaster. Where are you going? Disaster. Shaya yelled and slashed out with the holy sword in her hand. Black flames with strong corrosive aura rolled back and blasted towards the strange shadow. Disaster. Boom! The two black forces collided with each other. A powerful aura spread out in an instant. The grass under their feet was blown by the wind, and a large space was corroded. Disaster. In the void, a black shadow slowly emerged. Disaster. It was a huge monster. It was 2 meters tall and covered in long black hair. It stood up like a human. Its face was like some kind of beast. Its long canine teeth were protruding outwards. It looked extremely evil and ferocious. The long claws in its hands were shining with cold light. Disaster. Although the monster's body was huge, it didn't look like a real body. From afar, it looked like a strange shadow. Disaster. What is that? Ron was shocked. At this moment, he finally saw the true body of the ambusher. Without thinking, he stabbed out with his bone spear. Cataclysm. Kill it. Disaster. Pratt shouted. Under his command, all the mages joined in the attack. Countless spells bombarded the monster. The dwarf, Spark, also fired a shot. The sound of the gunshot was extremely ear-piercing in the forest. Natural disaster. Boom, boom, boom. The attacks of the Sacred Domain experts were extremely powerful. Explosions rang out in succession as a layer of smoke rose into the air. The ground also shook. Disaster. Did we hit it? Millie asked. Disaster. No, it dodged it. Pratt said. He saw the monster's figure mysteriously disappear from the spot, dodging all the attacks. Disaster. At this moment, Holy Priest Dora immediately ran over to Holy Shaman Moore's side and started healing him. A holy radiance lit up. Before long, Moore woke up. Disaster. Thank you, Disaster. Moore stood up. However, his expression was somewhat dispirited. Disaster. What kind of monster is this? It's so strong? Monty got asked. He was referring to the dwarf, Hill. He could tell from Hill's expression that he definitely recognized this monster. It's a disaster. Their king is really in a cataclysm. Hill's expression was extremely grave. This is a sacred domain exotic beast, a shadow wolf. It's also the king of the shadow wolves. Disaster. What? Upon hearing that it was a powerful saint-level beast that had come, everyone grew nervous. That sneak attack just now had left them with a lingering fear. Cataclysm. A rogue exotic beast. Sneak attack? Is that its ability? Pratt sucked in a breath of cold air. Disaster. No, it's not disaster. The dwarf Spark raised his head. The violent earth bear stood beside him like a bodyguard, constantly roaring at the calamity. Spark's beady eyes revealed a trace of darkness. I always thought this beast king hadn't come. But in reality, it was here a long time ago. It's been secretly watching our every move. As for us, we've already fallen into its trap. Trap? Everyone was stunned. Since when did exotic beasts have such intelligence? That's right. Disaster. Spark nodded. It's been scheming against us for a long time. If I'm not wrong, it should still be daytime. We unknowingly entered its dark domain. Dark domain? Everyone's hearts tightened. Was this the true strength of the sacred domain exotic beasts? You're saying that this is a trap? Hill frowned. If that's the case, then this exotic beast is too terrifying. Disaster. We have to retreat immediately. Disaster. Pratt said. We're in its domain. There's no way we can retreat. Disaster. Hill shook his head. We have to kill it. Disaster. At this moment, a faint shadow appeared on the treetops. It was as agile as a fish in the domain, appearing and disappearing in the darkness. Disaster. The werewolf was the king of the shadow wolves. It had the strength of the sacred domain. Disaster. Hee. Disaster. The shadow wolf let out a contemptuous laugh like a human. It stretched out its long claws and pointed at Disaster. A woo. The howls of the wolves resounded through the sky. Under the command of the shadow wolf, the shadows of the shadow wolves disappeared into the darkness. Cataclysm. Be careful, they're here. Disaster. Thought you're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.